Everyone. Welcome to Tree Summit 2020. I'm Rachel Mallard, your City Forest Officer for the City of LA. We're so excited to have you here with us this morning, celebrating our accomplishments of the past year and utilizing experts to help us frame and continue our conversations on topics we'll be addressing in the year ahead. As we give people some time to join us this morning, we're going to start off with a quick poll. We're going to go ahead and see who we have joining us today.
I'm sorry, Rachel, can one more time.
You want me to start from the beginning, Melinda, or shall we just go to the poll?
Just the title of the poll, please.
Great. We're going to go ahead and look at our participation for today, who we have on the call.
Hey, this is great. I just want to let everyone know that we have over 100 people online with us already. And we'll be sharing these poll results with you.
All right, a really nice spread from different audiences. We're so excited to have you all joining us this morning. So as we look forward, we know that we must plan for our urban forest, and our efforts are only going to be successful if we take time to utilize data and research, engage with experts, collaborate across departments and organizations, and of course, engage and hear from our stakeholders and residents. Urban forests are largely man-made and need our human intervention to grow and expand. Yet they're an imperative tool for our urban landscape to protect and enhance quality of life for our residents, particularly in addressing impacts of climate change. And we're really fortunate here in the city to have great leaders in our mayor and on our city council, as well as in our departments who recognize the need to invest in the urban forest. In planning today's summit, I worked with the Cross-Departmental Trees Committee that we received feedback from the LA Center for Urban Natural Resource Sustainability, and with tremendous support from Tim Tyson and the Streets LA team. We developed two goals for today. One, to celebrate our successes and update you on the progress from the past year. And two, continue to educate ourselves for the work to come. The topics we're going to address today are not meant to be considered exhaustive of the work that we're going to be undertaking, nor is this going to be our final conversation. I really see this today as continuing the conversation started at last year's Tree Summit. A few housekeeping items. As many of us have gotten more familiar with using Zoom and other online platforms, I just want to point out a few things as we get started. First, this is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom call. So in order to accommodate our large audience, you're going to be seeing the faces and hearing the voices of our panelists today. However, we do want you to participate in the conversation, and we'll be doing that in two ways. One is through this polling feature, which we got the first one going. We'll see if we can get the future ones, get me better communicating which poll I want Melinda to pull up. And then secondly, we'll be using the Q&A feature. So for each of our tree experts that we have joining us today, we've set aside time for question and answer. And we'll be using that Q&A feature to get your questions. So as you write your questions in the Q&A section, please, if there's a specific panelist that you're addressing, please write that in your question so I can make sure to direct it to the right person. And we probably won't have time to answer all questions, but we'll be sending out written responses as much as feasible after the summit for the outstanding questions we don't have time for today. And now we have a message for you all from Mayor Garcetti.
our urban forest. We will complete our tree inventory, create an urban forestry management plan, and we will continue to reach for the ambitious targets laid out in LA's Green New Deal. I'm confident that we can be innovative even in these times with limited resources for 3 reasons. It's a core value, first of all, and the urban forestry investments we've made over the past several years, and the leadership of Rachel Malarich, who's LA's first city forest officer, and our incredible partners will keep pushing us forward. Second, we believe everyone, regardless of your neighborhood or zip code, deserves to live in a greener and more sustainable Los Angeles. That's not a policy goal, it's a core value, and we're never going to lose sight of that vision. Because of that commitment and because of our partnerships with federal, state, and city agencies and nonprofit organizations, we've already planted 30,000 trees in Los Angeles. In just a year and a half, we're a third of the way to meeting our target. So I want to thank our speakers for joining us today. I loved the summit last year, and I appreciate that all of you are taking the time to continue to engage with us on this issue. And I know together we will build a more healthy, resilient, and sustainable urban forest and make Los Angeles a beautiful city of trees.
Rachel, are you frozen on your screen? Well, I see that Rachel is currently muted. While we sort this out, let's go ahead and do another poll here for you. My name is Melinda Geyer, by the way. I'm behind the screens here. Let's see, relative to the mayor's welcome, here's a question regarding the his Green New Deal priorities. What is that?
Chat without doing it.
Son of a bitch. It's not open. All right. That ends the polling there. It looks like a majority of people are interested in canopy increase, with the urban forest management plan a very close second. And I understand that Rachel had to restart, so she will be rejoining us shortly. Mm-hmm. You're not seeing that? So now I apologize for the technical difficulties that we seem to be experiencing, but in the meantime, I would like to go ahead and welcome our General Manager, Adele Hashkhalil, if you would like to go ahead and join us with video and audio, and go ahead and give you a nice welcome here to the department.
Great, thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us and being here today. This is an amazing time. Thank you, Rachel, for your leadership, and we're so lucky to have you. And I know some of you may have not heard the mayor's video in the beginning. We will be posting that on our website at streetsla.lacity.org. Plus, we also will be providing the link to the video through our communication back on this presentation. So good morning and thank you. My name is Adel Hash Khalil. I'm the general manager of Streets LA. I'm proud to represent the over 1,400 employees in Streets LA working hard day and night, enhancing the quality of life for everyone and making the streets safe, mobile, and sustainable. A year ago, during Arbor Day, we had our first tree summit. And that tree summit started a partnership with you, our community partners, environmental advocates, and sister agencies to expand, enhance, and protect our urban forest. I'm proud to say that together we have moved forward to commit behind the mayor's vision and a goal to double our tree canopy and to plant 90,000 trees, as you heard the mayor talk about today. Our urban forestry staff, under leadership of Greg Spots, Tim Tyson, Hector Benuelos, and many, many others, are now the stewards and the protectors of our urban forest. They are really asking the questions as to why do we need to remove a tree and how we can protect that tree. We're looking for ways to plant more trees and be engaged in growing our urban forest. Less trees are being removed to allow for sidewalk repairs. New alternatives are being developed and implemented to save more trees. And you'll see some examples today. More trees are being planted and watered. The tree inventory that you have demanded from us last year is underway, thanks to the funding from the mayor and city council to get that going. And thanks for the leadership of our Streets LA team, Greg Spots, especially, and his leadership. You demanded us to have a tree inventory. It's underway and being done neighborhood by neighborhood, neighborhood council by neighborhood council, and those things are moving forward. Our urban cooling efforts have trees now as a critical component in our project. It's no longer a cool pavement. We have trees now providing the shade, and that's the integrated solutions that we're looking for. Under the leadership of the mayor, we are committed to growing our tree and our urban forest and to put in place long-term strategies to improve the health of our urban forest. I'm excited about the direction and momentum and where we're heading. It's really, this is personal to me. I'm so passionate about sustainability. I'm so passionate about making our city a better place to live for our children and grandchildren. And we need to do it. And trees are a critical component of the health of our city. I'm so passionate about the fight against climate change. And we need to work on it. As our mayor said, we need to be on it every single day. Trees are essential to that. Streets LA's mission is to enhance the quality of life for all, for everyone. Trees are a big part of the quality of life. Commuters should be able to travel, ride transit comfortably and easily. And that means being able to wait for a bus under a tree and under shade. Our older residents should be able to travel and walk comfortably along a tree-lined sidewalk to the senior center, to the grocery store, to their grandchildren's school. But also we want to have kids be able to bike safely from their home to the school and back to the park under a canopy of trees. Also, we want to make sure beach goers go to the beach and don't get sick. And the question is, why am I talking about that? It's not, we're talking about trees. One of the goals I have, and one of the goals we all have, is to make sure that we continue to advocate for trees as a stormwater BMP. Trees capture water. Trees protect us. Trees reduce the speed of the flow of water, but also clean up water. So that's an area that we should continue to advocate for, continue to work on. Trees are an important part of greening our streets, capturing water and stormwater, and that's something that we need to continue doing. In addition to cleaning the air that we breathe, in addition to providing the shade over us. So trees are our friend, and we need to continue working hard to expand the tree canopy, expand our urban forest and protect it. But these are unusual times right now we're facing. We were moving in the right direction, had a right speed, funding was available. We're spending money on adding crews. We're spending money on our tree inventory, and those things are still underway. However, now we're dealing with the COVID pandemic, and you heard the mayor. The mayor talked about we are in new normal. We're challenged with funding and priorities, but we need to continue working forward on this area. The mayor has declared a fiscal emergency and to the city because of the pandemic. The pandemic has upended all our revenues. We have very bleak revenue projections, but we're hoping this is short term, but we need to be fiscally responsible. And you heard the mayor that we need to balance between our fiscal responsibility and continuing to provide services. So I know a lot of you have questions about the budget and the urban forest, but I may have answers to you, I may not have answers to you. Just yesterday, council adopted the mayor's budget, which if you hear from every council member, the president of council, the mayor, the chief administrative officer, the CLA, this is a snapshot. A lot of the basis for the budget are so uncertain that this budget is going to be a dynamic, evolving budget over time. If revenues go up, expenditures will go up. If revenues go down, we need to adjust. So council will be having meetings regularly through the Budget and Finance Committee on probably a weekly or bi-weekly basis to adjust. You know, it's, I want to thank you. Thank many of you who submitted comments to the budget and provided support for the urban forest, especially the letter from the coalition led by 3 people. I want to thank you for continuing to advocate for investment in our trees. You know, we have some cuts in our positions, we have furloughs, and those are across the board in the city. I know that those will have some impact to our response and care for the urban forest, but we need to work hard. We need to work now even doubly hard to utilize efficiencies and how we can partner with our nonprofits, with our community to really stop the gap and how we can continue protecting and moving forward. One of the things I don't want to do is I don't want to step back. I want to keep hovering and at least maintaining what we have so we're ready when money comes in, funding comes in, we can move forward. I appreciate the leadership of the mayor, city council, especially the chair of our public works committee, Councilman Bob Blumenfield, also Paul Koretz, and many others who really supported our urban forest. And our chair has really, our chair of public works has advocated for a 5-year plan to grow our staffing and resources to get to a trimming cycle within the industry standard. And we started that process last year. We have a hiccup right now, but I'm sure that we'll continue that commitment. That commitment has not gone away. I appreciate also that we got funding last year for tree inventory. Grateful to the city as a whole to get that funding in place. We are moving forward and implementing it. But also we had many motions recently as yesterday by council members supporting urban forest. You know, some of the things that they're asking for is different sources of funding, ideas. How can we leverage resources? And that discussion is going to continue, and because everybody sees trees as an essential element of our city's future and health. We've started to increase crews. We are planting more trees, we're watering more trees, and we are finding solutions to protect trees. We have begun to implement techniques and new strategies to be more surgical when we fix sidewalks. And you'll see that in some of these pictures that you're seeing, to avoid tree removal while reducing risk and liability. We want to get back to the growth trajectory very, very soon. And I want to continue this commitment. And that's why I'm excited about today. That's why I'm excited about our discussion today, because this is the discussion that gets us moving forward. We can't get anything without working together. You know, we need to focus on how we can make trees part of our recovery in the future, because I really believe the solution to any issue, any concern is the three I's that I've used before and I use regularly: the integration, innovation, and inclusion. We'll be looking for ideas to help us continue moving forward on expanding and protecting the urban forest. We are advocating to have trees be an integral part of any and all infrastructure projects, especially stormwater related. We are rethinking our street furniture program to integrate streets to provide shade. We are looking at every single corner to make sure how can we integrate trees as part of that program, because tree is, if you look at our Streets LA logo, tree is in the middle of that. So tree is our foundation. I'm eager to learn from the experts today, from our speakers. I want to thank them for their leadership and being a partner with us today. Building the urban forest management plan is something that we're working closely with Rachel on, and I'm excited that this is going to be what we're going to have to add resiliency and sustainability to the city. You know, I would say, and I've said that before, as we are now in the middle of protecting our fight of our life, fighting the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we're trying to protect our lungs, our personal lungs. I ask all of you to recommit to protecting and saving our trees. The trees are the lungs of our community. They're the lungs of our earth. I'm in, and I know that each one of you are in. So let's continue working together as we move forward to make this city, this earth, a better place to live. And let's continue planting one tree at a time to make this place a better place. With that, I want to thank all the people who made this happen. Melinda, Gaia, thank you for your leadership. Phil Fong, thank you. And I think a lot of people have worked hard. But I want to acknowledge people behind the scenes, the leadership at the Board of Public Works. You know, our president, Kevin James, and our vice president, Aura Garcia, and all the commissioners that have really made an effort to continue this support of Streets LA and our mission to protect trees. So I want to thank him, but also I want to thank the mayor's office. A lot of people you don't hear, you see the mayor, but there's people behind the scenes that work hard every day. You have our Deputy Mayor, Barbara Romero, who grew in advocacy, in community advocacy in the Mountain Conservancy and other places. Liz Crossan, who has been a leader in environmental leadership, and our liaison, our Assistant Director of Infrastructure, Jennifer Pope McDowell. I want to thank all of them for their leadership, for their support. And I want to thank everybody who's been working with us on getting this done. I'm so excited that we were able to get this tree summit. I was underway even virtually, because time is critical and we need to be ready to move forward. With that, I want to introduce somebody who has been a great friend to me, to Streets LA, but also great friends to the city of Los Angeles and the community around Los Angeles, an advocate for the environment, an advocate for trees, an advocate for services and quality of life across our communities. And we are lucky to have our new speaker, our new commissioner, Commissioner Teresa Villegas, who has joined us almost about a year ago, 6 months ago or so. But she's been amazingly a great supporter, but also she comes with amazing record from her advocacy and her work at the county and at the community level. So ladies and gentlemen, let me have Commissioner Villegas welcome you, and thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing the presentations. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much, Adele, for that, for your kind words, and thank you so much for your leadership over at Streets LA. It brings me great joy to be with everyone this morning on this beautiful Friday. We have a lot of sunshine and a great long weekend ahead of us. Even if we're home, it's nice to be able to at least take this time and be able to enjoy a slower pace of life. I know that I'm learning how to do that as well. Always go, go, go. But sometimes, life just throws curveballs at all of us. And I also want to thank, Rachel and her team and the leadership of Streets LA for putting this together. Life is still happening even as this pandemic is occurring. And the fact that we can still get this going and talk about the importance that trees provide and have so many people represented on this call today, it says a lot. It says a lot. So I'm really glad to be a part of it. Thank you very much. As our fearless leader Adele said, my name is Teresa Villegas, and I sit on the Board of Public Works for the City of Los Angeles. I've been there, I think, almost 9 months now, close to a year. I am proud of the work that I have been doing in this position. We oversee many infrastructure projects, and with Public Works, and this is our Public Works Week. We handle, all the issues dealing with sewers and trash collection and storm drains. But a part of that is also trees, as you've heard, and that's our living infrastructure. And trees are also an important element of the board, and they're the kind of infrastructure that increases in value over time. As climate change continues to heat our city, it is increasingly important that we invest in our living infrastructure and keep working towards the mayor's Green New Deal to plant at least 90,000 trees. It just seems like we can probably reach just a little higher as well, but at least given the resources that we have today. Every tree planted contributes to healthier air, cooler streets, and more shade for our neighborhoods. We know that many studies are also linked to the benefits that trees provide for our mental health. Right now, in the midst of this pandemic, we have become aware of these health benefits, especially cleaning the air, and are more important than ever. We are seeing that people in disadvantaged neighborhoods are suffering the most from this pandemic. A contributing factor, obviously, is poor air quality, among many others. And we know that neighborhoods are often, these neighborhoods are often the ones with the least amount of trees. And that's why the city has prioritized planting more trees in disadvantaged communities. And we will hear more about about that later today. For big cities like Los Angeles with such large populations, trees improve the quality of life for all Angelenos. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic will require fiscal belt tightening, as you've heard from our leader Adele. But we're going to strive for innovation, and we're going to try to do other ideas that will still be able to create and sustain an urban forest that is still healthy and growing. And because a healthy and equitable distributed urban forest is a core value, as you heard from in the city of Los Angeles, we're still committed to increasing our tree canopy. Today we are brought together by tree specialists as well as experts from outside to delve into these issues. Dr. Tom Smiley from the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory, Ms. Miranda Hutton from the USDA Forest Service, and Dr. Matt Ritter, Professor of Biology Department at San Luis Obispo from Cal Poly. They will all be joining us today. So let's talk about trees, and I won't take up more of your time. And I will turn the virtual podium over to Dr. Smiley, who will discuss the importance of our sidewalks and trees. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Yes, I will be talking about sidewalk and tree conflicts today. I am a researcher at the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory. And some of the research that I have been conducting may relate to your situation. So thank you, Tim, Rachel, and Melinda for inviting me. And I will go ahead and get started then. First off, why do roots damage sidewalks? Well, roots will grow wherever there is moisture, oxygen, where the soil density is low enough to allow growth, and where there are nutrients. So often we get a small root started and it will take advantage of the situation. So we can have some decent environments under sidewalks, especially because of water condensation. You've probably all seen this with a child's pool or something else you've left out on the lawn. You come out to move it and the bottom is all wet. Well, the same thing will happen under concrete where we'll get a layer of condensation. And again, roots will then go for that water. Now, all concrete will crack with or without trees, but when we have cracks and trees are nearby, we get more water and oxygen into those soils so that roots will then continue growing, grow faster, and start lifting that sidewalk. So roots can also lift sidewalks without cracking. That does happen sometimes, but usually they're taking advantage of pre-existing cracks. Well, some of the research that we've been doing here looks at ways of preventing sidewalk damage. And again, this is the way we have to start thinking. It's best to avoid the damage than to try to come back and fix things later. So how do we do that? Well, this study started back in 1996. We were looking at suburban sidewalk construction, and I know that varies around the country. But at this time in this location, the procedure was to scrape the topsoil, frame it up with 2x4s, and pour the concrete. While we were doing this, we also included a number of different treatments below that concrete so we could look at the impact of those treatments over time. Now, one of the things we know is that if you want to reduce sidewalk damage, you need to plant the tree as far from the sidewalk as possible. Here we're doing just the opposite. We're trying to shoehorn those trees in just as close to the sidewalk as we can get, so that we can see the impact of our treatments more quickly. So that was in 1996, and the treatments we were putting down alongside the concrete, we used a deep root linear barrier. Let's see, sorry, let me see if I can share these slides with you. I'm not sure why it's not coming through. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Let me get this started. Okay, yeah, I should have it here. And for some reason that talk doesn't seem to be sharing.
Tom, we can see the screen. It just doesn't appear to be in presentation mode.
Correct, yes. Let me see if I can.
So it's on the screen, but it's little. If for some reason it's not working, maybe you could manually click the screen that you're on.
Yes.
Or try double clicking on the main center.
Hit F5.
F5 doesn't work on mine.
F5 is to run the slideshow.
Do you want to try hitting F5? Does that work on your system?
Yeah, I'm trying it and it doesn't seem to be going. Sorry, let me start this over and see if I can, if that would do it.
No, no problem. And I just want to say you're doing a great job. And I want to thank our audience for joining us and for their forbearance as we're kind of navigating these technical issues. We seem to be having some internet connectivity challenges this morning. So thanks for sticking with us. You guys are the best, and this will be continuing shortly.
Okay. And it looks like we're still not up.
No, we lost the view of your PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to try.
So Tom, do you want to go ahead and continue to talk us through
Okay,
your presentation?
you still have me there?
You are here, yes. We're just not seeing
Okay.
PowerPoint, but we can see you.
Okay.
Now it goes.
Okay.
Now we're kicking with gas. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that delay here. Okay, so we were still not moving. Okay, so we're talking about the sidewalk, and we started some experiments. We were looking at deep root linear barriers 18 inches deep along the edge of the sidewalk. We've heard that those are, fairly expensive for cities, so we wanted to look at a less expensive alternative. We were looking at a black poly treatment, very inexpensive, same depth. We also looked at a layer of styrofoam under the concrete. We're using 4 inches of styrofoam. We also looked at a gravel under the sidewalk, and we were going with a fairly thin layer, just 4 inches. And we also wanted to look at a structural soil because we were seeing this on some of our clients' properties. So structural soils, if you're not familiar with them, are a mixture of soil and gravel, 80% gravel, 20% soil, and they promote root growth. So we wanted to give those a try. And then we had a non-treated control, just the concrete on top of the soil. We then grew those trees. Here they are 4 years after installation, and we're watering them and fertilizing them and mulching, trying to get the most growth out of those trees that we can. And here we are at 10 years. And at this point, we're starting to get some cracking and lifting of the sidewalk. So we decided it was time to take out the sidewalk. So we very carefully lifted it off of our tree and hauled it away. And then we excavated underneath the pavement. We started with air, but that wasn't powerful enough. So we switched over to high pressure water. Here we're doing it with a fire hose, but we also used higher pressure water in the form of a pressure washer. And we went down about 8 inches. And what I'm going to show you next are a series of photographs under the pavement. So the first one is right after the pavement was removed. And then the next one is typically air excavation and then the hydro excavation result. So the first one is a control. We lifted the sidewalk. You can see the roots are right there underneath the bottom of the concrete. And we had a lot of lifting and cracking with that treatment. Excavating down, air excavation, and then the hydro excavation, you could see roots well below the bottom of the sidewalk. And again, we're going down about 8 inches. The gravel soil mix, here you can see very little of the roots, but actually it's just one layer of rock down below the bottom of the concrete. So the roots were pushing up on the rocks, which were again pushing on the concrete and lifting it off. This was probably our worst treatment, and you'll see why as you look at these tree root diameters. So the background picture is the gravel soil mix, and the foreground is the control. You can see fewer but larger diameter roots in that gravel soil mix. The black poly treatment, here we are. Again, it's black poly installed vertically, 18 inches deep, and it worked pretty well. The roots could not penetrate that black poly underground. But there were some issues with it. 3 of the 5 trees in our experiment had roots growing over the top of the root barrier. And if I have time, I'll come back to this later in the presentation in a little more detail. We also tried the deep root barrier. This is a thick plastic barrier that snaps together. And again, the roots did not penetrate that barrier in our research. I know occasionally when I'm in California, I do see some root penetration of these barriers at the seams, never through the plastic. But basically the roots can grow down and come back up. But when they come back up, they're much smaller in diameter. So you can see the root coming in the middle of the frame here from the right. And that is from a control tree, but above us is the deep root barrier, and we're seeing a few roots coming up from below, but none are very large. We also used a 4-inch layer of styrofoam to push the roots deeper, and they grew deeper. They're still fairly large there, and as they enlarged, they pushed up on that styrofoam and they crushed the styrofoam, but they never got close enough to the concrete to lift the concrete. So we're going to gain maybe 10 or 20 years of sidewalk longevity by pushing those roots 4 inches deeper. So you can see, again, the roots under the styrofoam tend to be smaller and deeper. That again was a very good treatment for us. The styrofoam roots in the foreground and a control in the background. The washed gravel worked fairly well in addition. So the roots grew maybe halfway across, and then they changed to a sinker root configuration, basically growing straight down, then going across the sidewalk. So again, that was one of our best treatments as well, fewer, deeper roots. So overall, our best treatments were gravel. That's in our area, it's number 57 stone washed gravel. The styrofoam worked just as well as the gravel, and the deep root barriers worked a different way, but also work very well with no significant lifting or cracking with any of those 3 products. So that may lead you to the question, which root barriers are the best, or are they all the same? So this led us to another trial where we wanted to compare all the products that were on the market at that time. So we came up with these 5. A deep root barrier that we tried before. At that time of this experiment, treating things with copper hydroxide paint, a product called Spin Out, was very popular. So the Deep Root company treated their product with that Spin Out copper. We also tried Typar, a geotextile fabric, a fairly thick one in this case. And they treated the Typar with the Spin Out copper as well. And then there is an older product called BioBarrier, and we'll get to the details of that in just a minute. And we left a non-treated control section. So in this case, we're putting down willow oak trees that grow very quickly in our area, 60 trees. And we put the barriers on both sides of these trees and looked at root growth on both sides independently of the other side. So here's the deep root barrier. On the right, it's coated with the copper material. On the left, it's the standard panels. Again, we're using 18-inch deep barrier. The bio barrier was our next product. This is a non-woven polypropylene geotextile with the trifluralin impregnated in the black beads that you can see here. And that herbicide is non-systemic, but will kill root tips as they approach the herbicide. The geotextile fabric, again, a polypropylene fabric, it was either treated with copper or not. Here is the non-treated. This one's a fairly thick geotextile. It comes in a lot of different weights depending on the job that we wanted it to do. So we dug up half of the experiment after 2 years and the other half of the experiment after 7 years and looked at the roots that were at this barrier line. So in the 0 to 6 inch depth at the top of the graph, we had a lot of control roots, but very few roots from any of the treatments. But the roots were growing underneath the root barriers with particular vigor in the deep root treatment. I said that to the manufacturer of this product, and they responded as good salespeople will. They said, "That's great. We love to see those roots growing underneath the barrier." And that is indeed what their barrier is designed to do, is to promote roots growing underneath. And that probably has some long-term stability benefits. We had some root growth underneath with the other barriers at 2 years, but not as much. The next digging was 7 years after we installed. And at this point, we did have some roots coming back up to the surface, especially with the deep root. And that was maybe foreseen with that under barrier treatment at 2 years. And a few roots growing, but in a different way with the bio barrier and one of the copper impregnated fabric treatments. But overall, far fewer roots underneath where the pavement would be with any of the root barriers. We did have some penetration of the seams, and that's where these products tend to be the weakest, is at the seams. And you can see that here. If the roots get started through those seams, they will separate that product. So knowing this, you can tape or in other ways reinforce that seam to avoid problems. You can also purchase now thick plastic barriers from man-made products, or again, the Deep Root Corporation, that are seamless and will go for hundreds of feet, that would avoid this problem. What they're lacking is the ridges that redirected that root growth below the barrier. So one problem that we did encounter was roots growing over the top of the root barriers. We found this to be more common in the fabric barrier. The fabric barriers had a tendency to deteriorate. We saw that with the lightweight geotextile associated with the biobarrier product. We didn't see too much deterioration on the other geotextiles because they were thicker. Basically, the thicker they are, the longer they're going to last. But if those barriers were at all flexible, they did have a tendency to fall over. That's what we saw in the previous experiment. And then the roots would just grow over the top and get back to creating problems. So our conclusions with this experiment was that all root barriers did significantly change the root growth patterns that we were dealing with. The chemically treated barriers did slow the root undergrowth, but at 7 years, there wasn't really a lot of difference between the barriers. Slightly more overgrowth with the fabric barriers. So if I had a choice, I think I would be looking at the stiffer products. But again, one of the downside is they have to be installed with the top of the barrier above the soil line so that the roots can't grow over the top. With fabric barriers, you can maintain that to some degree, but it can become a real challenge. Okay, so can these treatments be combined? Well, we have another experiment installed to look at that, and we're continuing to monitor that experiment. We don't have the results in, but I wanted to share with you some recommendations from others, and this one is Rob Burke, who is an engineer, and he's working with a pavement company, a paver company. And basically with his design, he is combining the best of everything that we saw. So basically you're digging out where the base product would be, you're laying down a geotextile fabric, filling that with the washed stone, which can also be used for stormwater purposes, of course. We're going to have some storage and percolation from that. And then in his case, he's putting the pavers on top, but certainly you could put concrete on top just as well. And I think that's a very sustainable design. It will push the roots deeper, it will provide stormwater storage, and it should reduce sidewalk breakage for decades and decades. Okay, so moving on to the second part of my presentation. I'd like to say a little bit about root cuts. I know this is an issue in every city that when we have sidewalks cracking or lifting due to tree roots, they often have to make a decision. Are we going to remove the trees? Or are we going to cut those roots? So we have done a series of trials here about how close you can cut to the tree. And again, keep in mind there are different ways that you can cut roots. One is you can do a linear root cut like we showed in the previous video and still photo, where we're just doing one linear cut, typically fairly close to the tree alongside the edge of the sidewalk. But we do have another option, and that is cutting individual roots, often back further and taking those individual roots out. So we wanted to look at both of these cut types. And we know that there are two factors that we need to look at. First is tree health. Are the trees likely to die if we cut their roots at certain distances from the trunk? That is not a question that we were trying to answer in our experiments. We were looking at the second question, and that is with tree stability. Is the tree likely to fail after the root cut is the question that we were trying to answer. So there have been a number of studies looking at the distance of root cuts and the impact of tree health. One was from Dr. Gary Watson at the Morton Arboretum, and the more recent study is from Dr. Andrew Koser at the University of Florida. He was cutting around live oak trees. He was cutting all the way around the trees and then looking for a difference in water potential and growth. His closest cut was based on trunk diameter. So it was 3 times the trunk diameter. That's the red printing on this slide. And then he moved out 6, 9, 12, and 15 times trunk diameter. And what he found was that even at 15 times trunk diameter, a number that's totally impractical in most urban situations, that he found impacts on the moisture being taken up by the trees. Sort of the good news is that he didn't find growth impacts until he was quite a bit closer to the trunk, where he was starting to find them at 9 times. And again, a number that's not very practical in most urban situations. But then they started to get much more severe as he got closer to the trunk, being most severe at his last treatment location, which was 3 times the DBH. Well, going back to our research, the way we were looking at this is we were taking our trees and cutting them on one side with linear cuts, and again, based on diameters. So we were using a stump grinder, and we would cut a line across at each of the different distances, starting at 5 times the trunk diameter and moving right up to the trunk. And at this point, we had to turn the stump grinder around to shave those trees off. And this is what we do see in many municipalities when they are trying to protect the sidewalk. Well, we tested these trees both before and after cutting at each of the lines with a simple pull test. So we have a dynamometer and we have a winch system. We're pulling on those trees and measuring the force that it takes to reach an inclination of 1 degree, which we, in another experiment, correlated with the pull to failure. So here's what we found on smaller trees, in this case, willow oak trees. We started finding significant differences when we were within 3 times the DBH. So if we were 2, 1, or at the trunk. And obviously, as closer you get to the trunk, the more stability is lost. We repeated this on a number of different species. Red maple was the next one. We did small red maples and we did very large red maples. And here a similar story, but the numbers were a little bit different. Here we didn't really have much impact at 2 times DBH. It wasn't until we were within 2 times DBH, notably at 1 time DBH or at the trunk, that we started getting these significant differences in tree stability. And our last species that we tested was a Virginia pine. And this one, again, we noticed differences in stability within 3 times, but it wasn't until we were basically right at the trunk that we started to get significant differences in the stability of those trees. We relate this to the different root system configurations that exist in nature. They present 3 different types of configurations. One they call a deep or heart root system, where we have both lateral roots and more deeply growing oblique roots. The second is a horizontal or plate root system, composed mostly of lateral roots without those oblique roots below the trunk. And finally, the taproot system, where we have some lateral roots growing, but we also have a significant taproot. And if you correlate the root system that we're dealing with the pull test, I think you'll find a good correlation there. The weakest of these being that lateral root system B in this figure. Those are much more susceptible to damage, and the taproot, as we saw in the pine, least susceptible to the root cutting damage. So our summary here with the one-sided linear cuts is we know that it's best to keep all cuts outside the drip line. We'd like to do that if practical, but we know that that is not practical in many urban situations. We think the 5 times limit is a pretty safe and sustainable limit for many species. Again, there are species differences here. Once we get to 3 times dBH, we're getting into a zone where we have the ability to affect that stability on an immediate basis. When we're down to 1 or 1.5 times dBH, this is the point where if we have targets, we're going to have to start considering removal. We're doing a severe damage to that root system with most species. And again, this was for fairly young, non-decayed root systems without leans, and we would have to take all those factors into account. Our second set of experiments was looking at individual root cuts. Here we exposed all the major buttress roots on the tree and then severed those roots one at a time, taking out a section of the root, so we made sure there was no connection between the roots and the trunk until we were 50% of the way around the tree. This was one of the final products, and the colors are related to different post-cutting treatments. This is a graph of some of our large willow oaks that we looked at. It had a very good correlation, and I wanted to point out one area in this graph. That is this column of data. This is all related to one root being cut. At the low end of this, you'll see this point, and that is telling us that we only had about a 5% impact on stability. But the other end here is up here near 25. So one root cut, and we've reduced the stability of that tree by about 25%. And you can see, again, a fairly straight line that when we're out into 90% of the roots cut, I'm sorry, 50% of the root, sorry, I had it right the first time, 90% of the roots cut, and we're at 50% or more stability loss. So with the individual root cuts, the results highly variable. We can go from 5 to 25% stability loss with one root being cut. So it's best not to cut any roots at the trunk if we can avoid it. But again, sometimes we know that we have to. More than 1/3 of the root system cut will significantly increase that likelihood of whole tree failure. Well, with that said, I'm running out of time. I'll just point out a few references. Dr. Larry Costello from the Bay Area, working with Catherine Jones, has done a great publication looking at infrastructure damage by tree roots. We do have standards and best management practice for dealing with tree roots, both available through the ISA and the Tree Care Industry Association. We have standards and best management practice for construction, meaning sidewalk work, among other things, near trees. And we do have a bunch of research that we have published that we're happy to share with you. Most of it is published in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, ISA's publication, which is available free online. So if you'd like to get the details of any of the research that I've sort of very quickly gone over today, you can get it online, or you can let me know, and I'd be happy to email it to you. Well, with that said, I think my time is up, so I will turn this back. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smiley. That was fantastic. And I really appreciate what you touched on at the end there. We invited you to participate because you literally helped write the book on some of these things in terms of the best practices and engagement with other, true risk assessment best practices for the ISA, and I really appreciate your taking the time. We're gonna have one other thing before we jump into questions, but I do have one myself that I wanted to put out there. For that first study you were talking about with the different barriers and those components, we saw all those wonderful pictures of the roots, which is just super fascinating. What did the trees themselves look like? What was the health of the actual specimens involved like?
The tree health was good, except for one issue, and it's the issue that you share with us, and that is the Xylella, the bacterial leaf scorch. One of the reasons we terminated that experiment when we did is those trees were starting to become infected. Besides that, if we took those positive Xylella trees out, tree health was pretty good and not based on treatment. So the treatments didn't seem to impact tree health significantly. And again, the other side of the tree's root system growing, in our case, in an arboretum setting, in your case, in somebody's front lawn, as long as you have that half of the tree available with good soil, the trees usually adapt to that situation and do pretty well.
Great, thank you. So before we go to our audience questions, and thank you all for those of you that have been putting them in there, I am going to ask Tim Tyson, our Chief Forester within Urban Forestry Division, to share one case study that we have had recently completed, and then we'll go to questions. So Dr. Smiley, if you want to just mute yourself while we have Tim share that, and then we'll bring you back on for our Q&A.
Share screen.
And then PowerPoint, and you can talk so people can hear that you're doing this.
Okay.
It's double click.
This is Tim Tyson. I want to welcome everybody to the Tree Summit. And I work for the Urban Forestry Division, the Bureau of Streets LA. We had a location, and after hearing Dr. Tom Smiley speak about cutting roots, I hope everyone understands now that when we come in and we say trees need to be removed, it's for good reason. The 1200 block of Cherokee Street, Council District 4 under Councilman David Rue has been a very special and contentious site for the City of LA stakeholders, as well as the Bureau of Engineering and the Urban Forestry Division. You can see here, this is photo 1. This is photo 1 of the trees prior to the project starting. These are some pictures of the sidewalks, and you can see the sidewalks actually missing on this one tree, and the upheaving of the sidewalks and the trees. And you can see on this one how the large roots in the actual parkway are massive, and the sidewalks aren't lifted up that high on the side of the sidewalk, but the roots in the parkway are quite healthy. The trees are healthy. And so there are 18 large mature ficus trees consisting of 1 Ficus benjamina and 17 Ficus nidea trees. There are 7 trees on the west side of the street and 11 on the east side. These trees create a large canopy as the trees were planted very close together in a 4-foot parkway with a 5-foot wide sidewalk many years ago. The trees were first inspected by the citywide sidewalk repair program in March of 2018. The tree report went to the Board of Public Works in July of 2018 with a request to remove all 18 trees, subject to installing a new 5-foot wide sidewalk and fixing all the driveway aprons, as well as any curb damage. There was an appeal and the work was put on hold. In November of 2018, the Bureau of Engineering and the Urban Forestry Division then went out to the site and reassessed the trees, the sidewalks, coming up with a plan to reduce the sidewalks as much as possible while still making the sidewalks ADA compliant, so that we could be as far away from the buttress roots of the tree as we could get, because everything is in a limited area when you're confined to the parkway size. In December of 2018, the plan was reviewed by City Council. Councilman David Rue, who Urban Forestry Division and Bureau of Engineering worked with, spoke to the full council and stated that he worked with us and that he supported our new plan. At the time, the plan was approved to go forward by the City Council. The plan would be done in phases. First, the trimming of the trees to create a more upright vertical tree with the crowns balanced above the main stem without heavy lateral limb extension. The second phase would be root pruning of the trees starting at least a minimum of 12 months or later, so that the trees would have time to respond with new growth as the food storage is in the roots of the tree. The trees were trimmed in February of 2019. This is the job site briefing prior to starting. And this is what the trees look like after they were pruned. Yes, they were pruned hard. They're very large, tall trees still. The root pruning and sidewalk installation on the west side of the street started in May of 2020 and is now complete. This is where you can see the new sidewalks, the new driveway, the curb case 2 ramp that goes around and rounds around. And you can see we are basically just barely 1 time the size of the diameter of the trunk of the tree away from the roots at the bottom. But the 5-foot sidewalk would have been right up against the base of the tree. So we got an extra 2 feet because this is a 3-foot sidewalk here. None of the roots that grow laterally in the parkway were cut. The trees grow in 2s, 4s, and singular. Here's where the wraparound was. We only had to cut a few roots right here because there wasn't that many that went under the driveway apron. Here you could see the 3-foot sidewalk going around. This is the Ficus benjamina that you're looking at. And here's 2 trees that are together. And you can see it's a 5-foot sidewalk going down to a 4-foot sidewalk, going down to a 3-foot sidewalk. The east side of the street is now being started. 3 of the 4 requested trees to be removed and approved by the Board of Public Works will be removed, as pruning of the roots on these 3 trees is way too severe and it's against the buttress roots of the tree. So these 3 trees will be removed. That will leave 15 of the trees out of the 18. The replacement trees will be 6 Aphrocarpus falcatus trees. And half of the block has trees and the other half has no trees. So these trees will be moved down to the other end of the block, and we will fill in the other spaces as well. The Aphrocarpus falcatus are an evergreen tree and they grow to nice mature size and provide shade year round. This is a photo of now the trees 15 months later after they've grown back. You can see that the crowns are filling in the bottom of the tree where they had no growth before, as the branches were lateral and they went all the way over to the roofs of the homes on the left side of the screen, as well as on the right side of the screen. Now, we're going to go back in and we're going to trim the trees down even lower, but I wanted to wait until we had successful regrowth to trim too, so the trees will have green wherever we make the cuts. But we need to lessen the severity of the risk from wind and rain, as Dr. Smiley was telling you. But these ficus trees are one of the most resilient trees the city has as far as what can be done with them. Any other species of tree, I would stand up and say, no, we can't do this. But we are going to try with this set of trees. And going into the future, these trees are going to need to be monitored on a regular basis by the city, and they will need to be trimmed on a regular basis by the city. And if at any time there is any upheaving or cracking in the soil, the tree will require removal. But we're doing everything we can to try to retain trees. If we were saving trees, they would be preserved. A preserved tree, you really don't touch it at all. That's why it's called preservation. We're retaining these and we're trying to do that. But we need to be very careful. We need to be smart, and we need to be inspecting these trees on a regular basis. And we will be trimming them down a little smaller in size. However, they're still mature, fairly large trees. So with that, my presentation's over and I will turn it back over to Rachel.
Rachel, this is Adele. Can I just add something to what Tim was saying, if you don't mind? Rachel? Rachel?
Of course.
Yeah, sure. I want to say thank you to Tim. And I think to me, that happened when I joined the Streets LA and the mayor appointed me, and that was the first conflict. But I want to make sure that also I want to stress how the Board of Public Works and Commissioner and President Kevin James himself actually went to the site to really work with the community, the council office, our staff, to figure out how we can make it work. Actually, what came out of this is an action, a motion by the board directing us to start thinking differently of how to protect trees and preserve trees. The question is, what I think we're all dealing with is how we can make the streets safe, but preserve the trees as much as possible. And I know we're doing that, but I want to just acknowledge that it was very critical that the leadership at the Board of Public Works really asserted how important it is to preserve trees. And actually the board actually went out to the site and actually looked at it, supported us, was part of discussions and meetings of how to make it work. We're glad that we're able to save these trees. I mean, that's something that now the board is asking the questions, and policy has established in place to find alternatives, not to do it. But it all cannot be done just by leadership and policy. It's by actions and working together, which I appreciate that the board gave us the ability to go out and do that. But I'm also appreciative to Tim and his team for willing to think outside the box and start really working hard. So when I asked the question, when Kevin James asked the question about saving the trees, we were able to go out and find solutions. And it's always finding solutions to work. And this is not the only place. It's across the city. We have done more. So thank you to Tim and his work, but I also want to acknowledge the board and the president, Kevin James, for his work. Thank you.
Agreed. And I think that the information we heard from Dr. Smiley is that these decisions, there's a lot of components involved, and definitely no one within the city wants to see trees removed. And it's complex, and we appreciate the leadership of the board and then the flexibility of Streets LA to continue to look at these and offer recommendations for how we look at these sites where the trees are so important to the community members, and find ways. The conversations happening at the board level on a weekly basis as we look at removals of trees is really this dialogue between our urban forestry experts and urban forestry division and our board members who are providing that guidance and instruction when it comes to looking at protecting trees whenever possible. It's so important that we are very careful and also that we continue to be advised by science as we're doing this morning. So thank you for that, Adele, and thank you, Tim, for providing that update on the Cherokee project. And I understand that it's going to be an ongoing situation where we have to really monitor those trees and make sure that they stay healthy. And I want to just offer a little translation. For Dr. Smiley talked about high-level targets in urban forestry. That means we're talking about private property and the public. Right. So if a tree had its root pruned in the middle of the Morton Arboretum where they were doing that study and fell over, there aren't going to be as many high level targets. There aren't going to be people parking their cars underneath or walking there on a daily basis. And that's really the challenge for urban forestry, is looking at that balance of those high level targets, the people and private property that we want to make sure are protected, while we also have the benefits provided by trees. So I'm going to go ahead and Dr. Smiley, if you want to unmute yourself, we're going to take a few minutes of Q&A. I have a question from David Dahlke around whether or not can Dr. Smiley's presentation be shared as well as our future presenters. And my assumption based on the conversations we've had leading up to today is yes, absolutely. So this webinar is being recorded, so you'll have access at least in that form, but we'll talk with our presenters about having access to their PowerPoint. And then I'm going to go to a question, and within the Q&A section, I know that Martin Schlager has already indicated this in the comments, but if there's a question you particularly want to hear an answer to, please like it and help boost it up so we see that more than one person is interested in the answer to the question. So from Jeff Palmer, I have, what are your thoughts on the impacts of semi-impermeable tree well covering materials, such as decomposed granite, on the root oxygen exchange, especially in an otherwise very impermeable urban street setting? So that's a question for Dr. Smiley.
Yes, so with soil coverings, we like the more permeable. In general, the more permeable, the better. We'd like to see mulch. Mulch is great, organic mulch. Wood chips that your department produces every day is a terrific mulch material. Okay, if we can't do that for some reason, then the lighter the material, the better. Gravel is better than compacted soil. But there are certainly issues with gravel, and they are namely heat reflectance and transmission of heat into the soil. Is that better than bare soil? In many cases it can be, because it will provide some shading. So again, the more permeable, the better, and you'll have a healthier tree.
I am a huge fan of mulch myself. The next question we have is from Noel Johnston. What trees were planted? And I heard you mention willows, but if you can elaborate, and were they ever fertilized? What was the pH of the gravel that was used as a barrier?
So our gravel was pretty neutral. It didn't leach much. So that wasn't a real issue. I know that where some experiments are run, namely at Cornell, they use limestone. We did not. We used, I think it was a basalt product, but I'm not exactly sure. But I don't think it had any impact on the pH. But at Cornell, they did find that the alkaline limestone did reduce root growth under the sidewalk. So that can be another strategy as well, putting an incompatible pH. But it's a little bit risky in that you might just end up with chlorotic trees. Oh, nutrient wise, yes, we fertilized, we watered, we mulched, we wanted growth. So in our experiment, we went all out to get growth.
Great. We have another question. Is there a list of tree species tolerances to root pruning? And I know that you obviously laid out those different root types, those different root structures, but is there an easy place for someone to be able to go and look and say, here's where trees that'll do better or worse?
There are some. I think Dr. Costello's book on infrastructure damage may have that. Nelda Matheny and Jim Clark's construction book has a list. I think the Matheny and Clark book probably the most complete list, but it's something that, quite honestly, we're lacking in. And as far as root configurations go, that's a tough one too, because a lot of trees have some plasticity there, depending on the soil conditions that they're growing in. And maybe Dr. Ritter can discuss that as he goes along. He's certainly much more familiar with your local species than I am.
Great. I'm looking through our questions, seeing if we can take maybe one more. Streets LA team, is there one particular one that you'd like to see us have answered here live on the session? We have so many. This is fantastic. And again, we'll be working, Ryan.
Hi,
Go
this
ahead.
is Martin. I was reading through these questions, Martin Schlager with Streets LA. I was reading through these questions, and I was really getting a series of questions about how applicable in your test environment do you think it is to sort of a municipal environment? How applicable is the care, species selection in the environment of your testing to sort of the more urban sort of setting? And do you find any distinctions, or how did you try to adjust for that? Any specifics that you might want to comment on?
Yes, we certainly had a higher level of maintenance, promoting growth with irrigation and fertilization and nutrients. Yeah, it's tough to do these sort of experiments in the real world. It's hard to get people to cooperate with that sort of stuff, in that a lot of people just don't want to risk the sidewalk breakage. And that's part of what we do in research is, you know, we let nature take its course on some of our control trees. So yeah, it'd be better to do it in the real environment. We do it where we have the land available to do it.
Great. And with that, I think we are going to transition. If you'll hang out, maybe we have some more time for Q&A at the end.
Okay.
And regardless, we'll be reaching out to see if you can help us answer some of the questions we didn't get to today.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel, there is one question that Tim Tyson's volunteered to answer here.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Tim?
Diana Zogren asked a question about the mulch in the parkway under the ficus trees. That'll be the last thing we do, Diana. We still have to recrown the trees and bring them down in height. And we're still working on the east side of the street. So the last thing we will do is we'll put mulch from our green waste facility, and that we use 100% reuse. And it's just, we're not ready to do that yet.
All right. Thank you, Tim. So we are going to now transition, with much thanks to Dr. Smiley for the wonderful information he shared on a couple different elements of sidewalk and tree infrastructure conflicts. We have begun a long-awaited project, our street tree inventory, and we have Greg Spots, the assistant manager and assistant director, my apologies, assistant director and chief sustainability officer for Streets LA, here to share with us an update on the tree inventory.
Hey, everybody. Greetings from West Los Angeles. I thought we needed a little bit of music in here in this 200-person Zoom. So I thought I would play Yes We Can by the Pointer Sisters, because that's how we're feeling. And in the Urban Forestry Division right now. It's been an unbelievable year since we last convened, and so many great things have happened in the division. I want to thank Chief Forester Tim Tyson and his 4 superintendents, Hector Benuelos, Stephen Dupre, Ronald Tull, and David Miranda, who've all done a great job this year in growing the division. And also our new service coordinator, Melinda Geyer, who's helping produce this meeting and has been supporting Tim and Rachel in their efforts on tree policy. Before I get into the tree inventory, I just wanted to share with you how we're doing on our proactive tree care. When we met last year in 2019, we were in a transitional year where we were insourcing the tree trimming and dead tree removals. We were no longer contracting, and we were building up our city forces. Now we have 7 crews out in the field on most weekdays, and that can be up to 21 aerial towers trimming trees on a given day. We received an order of about 10 new towers that Chief Forester Tim Tyson configured for a lot of safety and efficiency innovations based on all his decades of experience in tree care. And I'm really delighted to tell you that we're going to exceed all 3 of our core metrics for fiscal year 1920. We set a goal of trimming 33,000 street trees with city forces. We're going to go beyond that. We set a goal of removing 2,000 standing dead trees. We're going to go beyond that. And we set a goal of planting at least 1,000 trees with our own forces, and we're already well beyond that. So I'll be excited to share those end of year statistics with you in July after the June 30th end of the fiscal year. So let me share my screen and let's talk about the tree inventory. You know, when we were getting that project started, you know, the project is very large. LA has up to or beyond 700,000 sites, trees, dead trees, stumps, and available planting locations, which would be one of the biggest tree inventories in the world. And we ended up dividing the project into 99 sub-projects, one for each neighborhood council, as a way to make this more relatable and provide a summary to each neighborhood council that they could use in helping us manage their urban forest. And so we hired the Davey Tree Company, who already was under contract with the city through Recreation and Parks, because we wanted the street trees and the park trees to be on the same cloud-based public-facing map. It didn't make any sense to have to go to one map for the street trees and a different map for the park trees. So it was really a neat thing to integrate the street and park trees together. And by having one tree management system for both, we can engage a community planting partner to plant trees in parks and in the street. And we can manage that whole project through a work order within the Davey system. So I want to invite you to explore the inventory data as it's coming in. And the way you do that is you go to our website, which is streetsla.lacity.org. And then if you scroll down, there's this tree inventory icon here. And if you click that, you wind up on our tree inventory page, which describes the project. And if you go down to here, we invite you to explore the inventory of trees on streets and in parks. If you click on this tab right here, you will end up launching the public-facing map of our trees. And let's go there now. Here we are with the Treekeeper map. It's at laparksca.treekeepersoftware.com. And as you can see, we have a metro crew of Davey arborists visiting sites south of Mulholland. And we have a valley crew visiting sites up here in Council District 2, north of Mulholland. The metro crew has already evaluated in person 40,000 sites. And the valley crew has done about 25,000 sites. So at 65,000 sites, we're about 9% completed with our project, but we're already bigger than many municipal tree inventory projects. Davey was telling me yesterday that many of the moderately sized cities on the high end find about 60,000 to 100,000 sites, and we're already there at the very beginning of our project. Let me take you into South LA, into the first neighborhood where we launched this project, the Empowerment Congress Neighborhood Council. I think it was Empowerment Congress Central. And I want to show you how you can look at a tree. I'm waiting for it to scale down here. This was always going to be the tricky part, is whether I could broadcast interactively with the tree inventory. Let's give it another second. I could always try to refresh. Let's start again. I'm getting the dreaded spinning ball. Hold on one quick second. Let's try refreshing the window. Oh no, now it's pink. Oh goodness. Let's try one more time. I was dreading that something like this was occurring. It's actually quite easy to use. My poor 6-year-old Mac is trying to broadcast and navigate this site at the same time. Hopefully we can, I don't know why that's happening, that pink. Well, when you get into I rehearsed this, but I didn't have these problems at that time. When you get into the map, you'll be able to see a whole bunch of triangles. And if you zoom into a street at enough detail, you'll be able to click on one of the triangles, and that'll be a site. It'll tell you the name of the species, and it'll say DBH, meaning diameter at standard height, and that'll give you a number in inches. And there'll be a little eye symbol, and if you click on the eye symbol, you get to this tree page. And that tree page has the overhead view from the satellite of Google's Maps. You'll have a Google Street View, side view image of the tree, and you'll have information about the tree. Be aware that our staff has their own further detail about the health of the tree, certain things that for liability reasons, we're not able to share with the public, but you'll be able to see the public-facing statistics of each of the trees and the available planting sites and the stumps. Now, let me show you how we've rolled that information up into reports. So here's the schedule. We have completed these neighborhood councils here. And of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that we've completed, 2, we've already published reports. So if you click on one of these links, you get into our summary report. So here's the summary report for Empowerment Congress Central. And I thought the finding here was very striking, that there was 7,300 street trees in Empowerment Congress Central among almost 12,000 sites. And if you look at this pie chart, you can see that almost 40% of the available parkway and tree well space is empty in this particular neighborhood council district. 1.7% is occupied by a stump. Almost 19% are palm trees, which can be scenic but don't provide much shade or eco services. And then we have 29% broadleaf, 1% conifer, and 10% other. So the shade producing trees are really only about a third of the available planting sites. We all know, all of us who are passionate about LA's urban forest, that South LA is an area of special concern. But I found this analysis to be very compelling to actually be able to quantify. If we think about it as an opportunity, there's a tremendous opportunity to improve the urban forest here in Empowerment Congress Central, with 40% of the sites being vacant. So I hope that you'll go and explore Davey Treekeeper on your own and take a look at some of the data that we've collected so far. And I look forward to a time in the future where we're all meeting in person again, because I hope that Melinda and I and Tim and Rachel and others can actually present these reports about the trees in a given neighborhood council to that neighborhood council in one of their actual monthly meetings. And I think those dialogues will be very interesting and very helpful. So thank you everyone for your support. It's so exciting to have gone from the tree inventory as an idea to getting $2 million in funding, getting one of the nation's best vendors on board where we could integrate the trees in parks. And now the data is flowing in, and although it's not visible on my computer at this moment, it is available to all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. And I will say, for me as a former tree planting focused person, the fact that we have the vacant locations, and along with those, Davey is collecting the parkway size of those available locations. And so when we go to start planning tree planting projects, we'll be able to really see how many small, medium, and large trees we'll be able to plant, and have some really interesting conversations with species selection for our neighborhood councils to engage with. We are now going to turn to Miranda Hutton. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some information. Miranda is with the USDA Forest Service and is here to share with us about the Los Angeles Center for Urban Natural Resource Sustainability. This partner, this local research hub, has been a tremendous help to the city of Los Angeles. It worked with CAL FIRE to fund that first step report that was published in December of 2018, and has also helped to fund the LIDAR study that really augments our tree inventory project in terms of really showing us existing and potential canopy cover throughout the city. So it's been a tremendous research partner for us in terms of identifying a need and then helping us find resources to go and address it. So I'm really excited to have Miranda Hutton here to share with us a little bit more about the Urban Center, because I feel like not everybody is as aware and familiar with its work.
Well, thank you so much for the warm introduction. And can everyone hear me okay and see my presentation? Hopefully.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And so thank you again. Good morning, Los Angeles. Happy Friday, and appreciate the warm welcome. As my grandmother likes to say, put on your turn signals, time for something different than what you've been having thus far. It's part of the Tree Summit LA. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, to be able to talk about the Los Angeles Center for Urban Natural Resource Sustainability, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we've nicknamed it the LA Urban Center for short. So during my presentation today, there's 4 pieces of information in particular I hope you're able to take away. One is what the LA Urban Center is and our unique model for getting work done. I'm going to be overviewing some of our research programs, ongoing research programs, and talking a little bit about the tools and resources we've created with that research that can help you in the work you do in urban natural resources. Maybe by the end, fingers crossed, I've piqued your interest in the work that we're doing in the LA Urban Center. And so I'm going to highlight some opportunities for anyone, the public, partners, and folks here on this call to engage in the work that we're doing moving forward. So for those that aren't familiar with the LA Urban Center, it was founded initially as a partnership between the City of LA with City Plants, the nonprofit arm for the City of LA, and the US Forest Service, based on a need to do a couple of things. One was to identify best available science, and 2 was to increase our shared capacity to address information gaps, which I'm seeing throughout this Tree Summit is an idea that a lot of people can get behind and are trying to create in their own pieces of work as well. You know, since its inception, it's really grown into a multifaceted partnership. It includes federal, state, and local government partners. We have folks from academia, from industry, nonprofit, and private organizations, all contributing towards our shared mission, which simply put is improving and enhancing our urban natural resources and quality of life for everyone in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Easy, right? Our mission is we serve as an information and research destination hub. What that means is we're fostering collaboration, we're generating new science, and we're delivering that information to help folks on the ground and engage diverse communities in those knowledge bases in those communities for shared learning. We do this through 3 big pieces of work. We convene, research, and do outreach. We act as a convening entity, whether it's through meetings or seminars or webinars on hot topics like climate change, forest health, prolific shot-hole borers, drought, fire. We're trying to bring national expertise here to LA and share that information to help work on the ground. And we also do facilitated sessions with all of our partners here in LA. And that is the really great opportunity for us to hear about what's eating everybody's lunch. What are these information gaps? Because that leads directly to priority research that we are doing at the LA Urban Center that is place-based here in LA, but provides tools and resources that everyone can use in California. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say, you know, information is only as good as the hands that it is in. So a lot of our work is all about outreach, making sure that information gets to those target audiences, whether it's the public, our youth, professionals, or other researchers, to make sure that information is being used properly. We do big events like ArborFest in the Kiosko area in El Pueblo, which had a deconstructed urban forest that explained ecosystem services of the trees in LA. We've done, we have online researches and tools for folks to share information. And we do tree seminars and webinars in different public places. We're part of the LA County Fair each year as well too. We recognize that here's the deal, professionals, researchers, and our next generation all get information in different ways and they want it in different formats. And so we're trying to tune that as we go along with our work. As you might imagine, it takes a city to make that happen. You know, some people say a village, I'll say it takes a city. Partnerships are so successful, so essential to our success at the LA Urban Center and really embody that shared capacity. And this is just our oversight team main partners, and I wanted to just thank them because they've done such a wonderful job of helping us shore up different partner groups for input in our recent strategic plan that we updated. That strategic plan better aligns with city priorities, whether it's urban forest management plans, tree plantings, and inventories. And we really just appreciate having them on our team. And in fact, some of them are on this session. I saw Leon and Edith and Pat Winter and just wanted to, and Rachel Leary and Elizabeth Hodeggy from City Plants. I just want to thank them again for all of their work to make the LA Urban Center a success. I mentioned we're place-based, and we made a strategic decision at the beginning to have our core team right in the heart of LA. We're located in the Pueblo de Los Angeles Historical Monument, kind of catty corner to the city hall, or at least we can see it from the second floor of the Biscaluz building, which is where we're located. And there we have our LA Urban Center administrator, Yassi Wilkins, as well as our lead social scientist work out of the second floor. And the El Pueblo backdrop really affords us many opportunities to engage in the public, whether it's in the big Kiosko area, working on the Arborfest or other public engagements, or working more curated approach to some of our work in some of the side buildings and museums. We've really been able to reach a lot of people in this one setting. Just one example is last year we created an exhibit for fourth graders, and I don't know if this is a fun fact, if everybody already knows this, but 100,000 fourth graders visit El Pueblo every single year. And so it's a live audience that we have working, live audience that we can share our information, research, and outreach with every single year. So what do we share about? Well, we share about our ongoing research programs. And so I'm not going to talk about all of the research we're doing, but I'm going to highlight in the time we have here today some of our ongoing research programs that I think are applicable to those here on this Zoom call. Climate Ready Tree Study. It asks the question, what trees should we be planting now for the climate we're going to have 20 years from now? We recognize that we are in a changing climate. It's going to be hotter, it's going to be drier, and we're going to have different invasive diseases and pest pressures. Doctors Greg McPherson and Natalie Van Dorn from the U.S. Forest Service partnered with Allison Berry from UC Davis and her team to conduct a longitudinal study by creating an indicator system, firstly, to pick out the ideal trees of LA for the future that maybe we're not planting right now, and to planting these trees and monitoring them over the next 20 years. I think two really great products out of this has been not only understanding what trees we maybe need to add to our species palette moving forward, but also this 21 indicator system to think about when we're picking urban trees to plant in our different landscapes. It's not just about planting what is ornamental and beautiful. As you guys know, there's a lot of other criteria that go into that, as well as risk. And I think that's something that Greg, Natalie, and Allison Berry created in that toolkit system that's very valuable. And you may actually have a long-term monitoring site near you, because we had great partnership with the Los Angeles Beautification Team, as well as the Los Angeles Recreation and Parks Department, to plant, monitor, and maintain those trees. So check them out. So another project we've been working on is focusing in on environmental justice communities, because they're often the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And it's a priority of the LA Urban Center, and I know a lot of folks here on this call, to build up environmental assets in those communities to develop better resilience to climate change. One of the projects we funded included Edith de Guzman and Rachel Malarick, of course, at the time at Tree People, but now working for the city, as well as Jennifer Tabanico from the Action Research Community-Based Social Marketing, and Lori Large from California State University, to create a pilot research program that applies community-based social marketing to the challenges of urban tree stewardship. This pilot program was done in Huntington Park, and it created a fantastic toolkit of how we can apply social marketing to strategies of tree planting and tree health. And the best part about this toolkit is it's not just for that one community or that one nonprofit. It's designed for communities and nonprofits to apply different marketing strategies to advance that urban natural resource management. And of course, they created some very cool outreach materials in the process as well. So I've talked a little bit about health and benefits of our work in trees, but what about the people that put them in the ground? That's right, the stewardship groups that work all across LA. What do we know about them? Well, the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project, or LA StewMap for short, does exactly that. It's an analysis of what environment groups are working where, who are they collaborating with, what effect are they having, and how are they doing it? And so this really gets at the heart of what people care about, their priorities, what they're working on. It's an organizational survey that's been sent out to a number of different organizations to answer questions about their stewardship activities. We're going to be creating a network analysis as well as a map viewer so people can click on and see where everybody's turfs and effects are across the LA landscape. But we've already had some really great results from the preliminary survey. It's helped us identify what priorities of people, what different groups are working on, but it's also helped us connect groups as well in a different way. Say you're working on street trees, just to do an example a little bit earlier today, and you're looking for expertise in creating bioswales. StewMap can help you make those connections on groups that have that expertise. Conversely, it can show where we have really big information gaps that we need to fill across our stewardship landscape. One of my favorite projects we're working on is a project that is a tree preference study game. And we know a lot of the plantable space that we have resides on private properties in many cities. And so in order to enhance our urban tree canopy, we really need to focus in on residential tree plantings. However, there's some challenges, as you all know, with that, because engagement is a key issue and stewardship of those trees can be an ongoing issue. So this project aims to use game boards to understand people's tree preferences in their backyards, in their front yards, in their streets, and their communities, and how that might impact residential tree planting programs. Doctors Pat Winter and Nora Davis from the U.S. Forest Service created a game board depicting neighborhoods to choose from different species and help them understand the prominent ecosystem services they provide. And through the games, we can better understand how decisions for landowners are derived and what they perceive as the values that they want to have in their trees. And so a lot of these findings will be pulled together to help inform residential tree planting programs in the communities that we reach out to with the tree planting game. So some of you may be most familiar, though, with our LA Urban Center is our fellowship program. It's a competitive grant fellowship that culminates in a yearly seminar that covers topics highlighted by our partners each year as priorities for research. We've had projects on citizen science, on user use in our recreation areas, on drought, on climate change. And in fact, last year, we had a hot topic focus of the invasive shot-hole borer. We had multiple students working on that particular topic. One creating a rapid detection method that aims at low cost and simple modes to detect the shot-hole borer in the field. And another one creating a toolkit to show host characteristics and movement of the invasive shot-hole borer along the Santa Ana River. And what is also very neat is all of these seminars and webinars are available on our website, and they have been presented by a certificate by the mayor of LA for their work each year. And we're on our 5th cohort students, and I'm super happy to announce that the focus for this year's fellowship is all about urban forest management and helping out with urban forest management planning, and particularly that LiDAR data that Rachel mentioned in my introduction. How can we use that LiDAR data, the tree canopy data derived from that LiDAR, to be specific, to better understand where our trees are, what benefits they're providing, and priorities for trees plantings moving forward. And I noted earlier on that a couple of our fellows are even on this Zoom call right now. Corey Bassett, I saw your name. So it's great to see that they're already engaging in what the priorities are for LA and being a part of this tree summit and listening in. Look forward to hearing about their results soon. So while we have research fellows, we also have a cadre of outreach specialists that are going to neighborhood plantings. They're doing big public events, working at our LA County Fair, doing online trainings to help share and transfer that research and information to the public and target audiences out there. As I mentioned, you got to get it into the right hands in order for it to be valuable. And so we've had a really great success story of bringing in a variety of information specialists to share that knowledge. And we even have a couple right now working remotely, creating webinars for us, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well. So online resources. Maybe I've piqued your interest in learning more about some of the snapshots of research that we're working on. We have a lot of really cool resources on our website. We have a research database that is searchable and populated with LA-specific research, as well as research from around the world that could apply to being done in LA. So for instance, it's research in an urban area in the same climate. It's a part of our database. And it is a really great tool to know about the latest and greatest information across a number of different searchable areas. We also have an engagement youth section of our website that's seeming to get a whole lot more traffic in the last 8 weeks or so. I suspect because there's a lot of kids at home and parents possibly are looking for new and greater resources to engage their kids. But we have a number of really great resources that target youth, that translate our research to the next generation. Just to highlight one that we're doing right now, we've partnered with Project Learning Tree, which is a national group that provides environmental science learning to all sorts of schools across the nation, including LA district schools. And we just hosted a couple of webinars. Last one was about boars, and I am invasive shot-hole boars, and I'm very hopeful of the next generation to help us continue improve our urban natural resource sustainability based on that last webinar. We also have tools and presentations. So I've mentioned a couple of tools already in my section on research. They're all available on our website, as well as all the presentations and seminars that we do. Our fellows seminars are recorded and on the website, as well as a lot of the tools that I've just mentioned. So it's a really great place to kind of explore and see what might be valuable to you in the work that you do. And I usually don't do this, but I'm gonna give you a little teaser because I think, given the audience, this is a kind of exciting thing. As Rachel mentioned, in partnership with CAL FIRE and Tree People, we've used LiDAR data to create a tree canopy layer. It's available for download with permissions, but we wanted to create something that is more user-friendly and available to the public. So we're partnering again with the same group and creating a map viewer that will be housed and linked to our website. It'll also be overlaid with really important information, which is all about are social, economic, and environmental considerations that we think about when we think about where we plant trees and move them forward. And particularly social and environment or economic considerations that trees can help ameliorate and improve if they are planted and maintained. Okay, so I've been talking really fast because I know I got a short period of time, but I want to pause and say, hopefully I've piqued your interest. Hopefully you might be interested to engage with the LA Urban Center. So I'm going to outline a couple of ways that you can start maybe on Tuesday, because it's a 3-day holiday for a lot of folks, to engage with us moving forward. One is engage in our partners meetings, our science seminars, and our workshops. We have the facilitated sessions where we look for creating some consensus around research needs and priorities. We provide workshops on those pieces of information that we can and bring in national expertise. We have the science seminars, we have the fellows webinars. These are all really great opportunities to learn more about the LA Urban Center and its priorities of work. You can connect with our ongoing studies. If you are a stewardship organization, boy, we want to hear from you, or LA StewMap, interested in helping us think about what layers should be in that tree canopy layer derived from LiDAR. We want to hear from you and hear what your priorities are, because otherwise, if we don't get that information, we're not going to make a product that we can outreach very well. Maybe you're doing your own research. Maybe you have your own tools that might be related to some of the work that we're doing. We are more than happy to share your research on our research database. We have interns that help review and create curated paragraphs that synthesize your information. And we also have a stay connected part of our section where we showcase other pieces of research happening in the LA area. Last but not least, maybe you can join us for an outreach event. Join us for sharing your information, your work. Maybe you want to dress up as Smokey Bear, maybe not. Always looking for volunteers. Anyways, you know, this part of our work, as you might imagine, is evolving. And we're going into a more online profile right now during COVID-19. But I anticipate that, you know, there will be a time when we are going to be able to talk more than 6 feet apart, and we'll be doing outreach events, and maybe in a different way. A little bit of a teaser, we'll have fellowship seminars coming up from that latest cohort once their fellowships are close to completion. And we are in the talks with the U.S. Forest Service to create an Urban Wood Academy for LA this December to showcase all urban wood utilization and practices, best practices. So based on some of our comments about how we use urban wood past its takedown. So with that, I leave you hopefully with some interest and an email and a phone number and a website. Please come and join us and stay connected with the LA Urban Center because its shared capacity is what makes it special and valuable to all of our partners. And with that, I hand the reins back over to Rachel to ask any questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Miranda. That's great. And I just appreciate the opportunity for people I didn't know you were going to be talking about the research I did that I'm still very excited about, but, and I'm super thrilled to hear about the LiDAR map portal, because that is something I get a lot of questions about. People say, you know, I see the reports that are available that were produced as part of that, but how can I dive into that data? Some of us really like maps. So I'm really excited to hear that the public will have access in some form to that data.
Yeah, and may I just add, right now available on the U.S. Forest Service website is a map canopy layer from 2012 of the entire state of California that's searchable and downloadable. This will be incorporating the latest and greatest information, which is LiDAR data from I think 2017. And will be a little more accurate and a different resolution. But for those that are interested in digging into maps now, that is available across the whole entire state for our urban areas.
Yeah, and I know that we're looking forward to maybe discussing in the future some urban tree canopy assessment and seeing how we can use the different data layers to see how our canopy is changing. But
Yeah.
we'll leave that as a teaser for now. I do want to also acknowledge that the LA Urban Center typically has a spring convening where we get to hear some updates from fellows and other things. And that was the original goal with the Tree Summit, is for us to combine with you all and kind of help integrate our two audiences, so to speak, you know, the urban forestry stakeholders in LA, and make sure that they were also getting more information, and now they know how to connect with you directly, which is great. I do have a couple questions we'll ask before we move on. One is related to the STU map. I think it'd be helpful to hear if there are, Catherine McNinney has asked a couple questions related to the STU map, and I think it'd be helpful for us to understand how those of us who participated in the surveys can access or be involved or use that data, and maybe share a little bit more about how it's being used, if there's an example.
Great, I'm happy to answer that question. So some of you might have participated in the LA STU map. There's actually two components to it. There's the LA STU map, which is the big picture, and there's actually a focus of the LA River that we're working on right now as well too. The survey was put out, the results have come in, and we're in the process of analyzing those results and teasing out what are the important thoughts that we want to take away from what we're seeing on a macro level and create a map viewer. As I mentioned, the person in charge, our big partner is Loyola Marymount University, and Dr. Michelle Romolini. She's currently out on maternity leave. So we're hoping to have some products available to you all when she returns back in August. So that's kind of our new deadline set up for the LA STU map. Now, if you guys are looking for products right now or an analysis of what she's done, which is that preliminary analysis, those are available on our presentations section at the LA Urban Center, because she's presented at a couple of our webinars.
Great, thank you. I do also, another translation moment. I know Diana Zokrin has asked what you are referring to when you talk about tree stewardship.
That's a great question. So actually, stewardship in the STU map has a broad and very defined context. It's basically everyone working in natural resource management, and it has a both formal and informal context to that. And there's a very, let me see if I can pull it up real quickly, but for that very technical, like 2-line word of what stewardship organizations are, you can just check it on our website. But to paraphrase, it's people working in that field. So maybe not technically people working in tree planting, but maybe it's a neighborhood organization that is doing tree care and tree maintenance. So it's not just your very traditional groups. Or maybe it's someone working on the LA River, and they have a tree component to part of their overall mission of improving water quality along the LA River.
Great, and I am gonna have us do one more item before we move on to our next speaker, trying to be cognizant of our time. We'd originally hoped to have a facilitated conversation about research needs. And we aren't going to be able to do that in the way that we'd hoped to, and maybe we'll be able to do that in person in the future. But Melinda, can we get the research priorities poll up so that Miranda can get a sense of what kind of research you all are most interested in? I'll say the name one more time. We've got our research priorities poll.
All right, let me activate that for you. Hold on.
And I'll just acknowledge while we're getting the poll up that a lot of our Q&A that I'm seeing now, we've got a lot of really interesting policy suggestions and conversations, and I definitely am seeing some future sessions developing as I see these, see where we might have some additional conversation. But let's go ahead and see what your research priorities are.
And I would just say the LA Urban Center is always here as a partner for the city of LA to help with those facilitated sessions. Sometimes it's helpful to create bubble maps and think big picture and then drill that down to what that actually means. And so we're here to help that when you want it.
Great.
Okay, we're going to leave this poll active for a minute, and then we'll go ahead and close it. And I've also received a request to figure out who all's in the room. So we'll be redoing poll number 1 since we've had more people join us. But we'll give this first poll another 10 seconds before we close it out.
All right, got it. Educational workshops and collaborative studies.
And we'll just leave that as a teaser for future information that we'll be gathering from you all to share with the Urban Center, or again, have some facilitated conversations that they're able to step in and help us with. So thank you so much, Miranda. We really appreciate your being here, and hope that people check out your website and continue to find ways to bridge that gap between research, practitioner, and the public. I think that that's so important. And I see we've got our other poll. How are you involved with the city? So a couple of you were, well, maybe half of you were on earlier, but we're going to take a look again and see who we've got on the call. And while you're doing that, let's see, we'll get ready for our next speaker. We're going to have Dr. Matt Ritter. And I actually, Melinda, let's go ahead and do our tree species criteria poll after this one, because I really do want to get a sense of folks' feelings around tree species before we get Dr. Ritter on. And there have been a couple questions in the comment bar around our tree species list. It's going to be really important that we have an opportunity to engage with our neighborhood councils and with others as the tree inventory data becomes more available, to talk about what trees we want to see in our communities. So, sorry, I'm gonna get that back in order. So we used to have a tree list on the city website. Oh, we've got quite a few city employees here, which is fantastic. We want to see you all getting more information around urban forestry best practices. And I'd love to see the members of the public that are also joining us today. So thank you all. And we can go ahead and do the tree species criteria. As I was saying about the tree species list, we're going to be doing some additional updates to that list. But the more important thing to me is that we look at how we approach permitting trees and locations. And just having an updated list is not going to address the fact that we need to be looking at our sites, looking at the conditions currently within the inventory data. It gives us so much information to say what trees are here already, what trees are doing well here, and what are the trees we should be looking to plant. And that's not something we're going to do in a vacuum. We're definitely going to be talking with community groups to see what is important to them. So the question here, what criteria do you think about first? What's most important to you when you're picking a tree?
And I just want to say how exciting it is that we have about 150 people currently with us in the audience. We were up to about 200 at one point. And we'll be closing out this poll in just a moment.
All right, we've got a kind of almost tie for first place, potential infrastructure conflicts and shade. And you know, the truth is that shade and infrastructure conflicts kind of go hand in hand. If there isn't enough space for a tree, we're not going to get quite as much shade. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about and looking at, is how we make sure that we have space for large trees within our city whenever possible. So with that, I'm going to bring in our expert. Dr. Ritter is a professor in the biology department at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. He's a noted tree expert and author. His books and scientific papers attempt to foster an appreciation for and a better understanding of California's unique native flora and diverse urban forest. On a personal note, his book, A Californian's Guide to the Trees Among Us, and our Select Tree tool that's the website managed by his team at Cal Poly are two of my 3 favorite tools to offer to people that are exploring the topic of tree selection. So we're really thrilled that he can join us. Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. You can hear me okay?
You are loud and clear.
All right. I'm going to share my screen with you there. There's a title slide. And you can see that okay?
Yes, we've got your slides.
Nice. All right. Well, let me do one more thing here. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you for that introduction. Tim, Melinda, thank you for inviting me to speak. I am, like Rachel said, a professor at Cal Poly in the biology department. I was also a commissioner in the city of San Luis Obispo for 8 years, and where I dealt with tree removals and controversial issues of development and tree preservation. And I'll say that a lot of the problems and controversial issues that we deal with in cities stem from poor tree selection and poor tree selection decisions early on. And I'll make an argument to you about how important tree selection is and how it can't be treated as it always has. And I think a lot about tree selection, and I'll share some considerations that I think about and some tools that we've developed to help with tree selection. I'll start by saying that anthropogenic climate change is real. It's upon us. Temperatures are rising and fires are getting worse. It's becoming statistically impossible to explain what's happening outside the possibility of a changed climate. 16 of the 17 warmest years on record have occurred since 2000. 15 of the 20 worst fires in California history have occurred since 2000. This is a map that shows how much warmer the last decade was compared to temperatures recorded between 1951 and 1980. Even the most conservative climate change projections show that baseline climate temperatures continue to rise. We now know that above a 2 degrees Celsius baseline climate change would be catastrophic, and we're quickly headed that way and trying to maintain that temperature lower than that. These maps show changing hardiness zones and the general warming that has occurred in the 25 years between the publication of the 2 Arbor Day hardiness zone maps that you're seeing there, one from 1990 and another one from 2015. What you see in red are areas that have shifted to a warmer zone in the time between the publication of the 2 maps. We're no longer planting the same plants where we used to, and the plants that always worked in certain zones are now failing. California is getting hotter. These are recently published maps from data from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration showing how much baseline climate has shifted in Southern California since 1985. And most of that shift, since 1885 actually, and most of that shift happened actually since the 1970s. And it's just predicted to get warmer. Warmer also means drier most of the time in our Southern California Mediterranean climate. Los Angeles is projected to get hotter. The graph on the right shows the current average number of days exceeding 95 degrees in orange, and below that in red, those bars are the predicted future numbers of days over exceeding 95 degrees, and those are in red. You can see the red bars mostly always extend past the orange bars, and this is with a number of climate change projections and different models. There are 40 million people, give or take, living in California, and over 3/4 of the original wild habitat that we had here in California has been lost over the last 250 years. Half of all the food grown in the United States, half of all the food eaten in the United States is grown here in California. So we have these major agricultural and developmental impacts on our state. Meanwhile, the biodiversity crisis is severe, and all the discussion about climate change, something that doesn't get brought up as much, is impacts on biodiversity. We are in the midst of what most scientists consider the planet's 6th mass extinction event. In this paper, eminent botanist Peter Raven said that it's possible that 2/3 of all the terrestrial species are at risk of extinction by the end of this century. The world is experiencing an alarming loss of biodiversity. And this is well documented now in several high impact peer-reviewed publications. This is one in which Paul Ehrlich and his colleagues showed that species extinction rates are being recorded at several orders of magnitude greater than the number of extinctions expected under constant standard background. Meanwhile, our forests are being hammered throughout the world, from northern Borneo to northern California. There are major changes in forest ecosystems. Recently, a worldwide collaborative research initiative produced the first continuous tree density map of the globe. And they discovered that half of all the trees that have been removed and half of all the trees present on the planet have been removed and not replaced in the last 10,000 years since the advent of human civilization and agriculture. And they also estimate that based on the rates of deforestation, that there are 15 billion trees cut and not replaced each year. In California, in less than a decade, we've lost nearly 5% of the total trees in the state, and this includes in our native and urban forests. We're experiencing a new reality with a precarious future for both our native and urban forests, and this is the same thing that's happening in many places in the world. In California, we have 7.5 billion trees growing in the land area of about 163,000 square miles. And that data comes from the ground truth plots in the paper that I just showed you. So, and with a population that is around 40 million people, and set to by 2050, the population is projected to surpass 50 million people. And with that population, that's 191 trees per person in California, which is half the world average of 400 trees per person. But that's not the only story here. People don't actually live throughout California. People don't live throughout the world, for that matter. People live like this in California, not out in wild forests and the hillsides, but they live in urban forests. They live in urban areas and the trees that are planted around them. They live in cities: San Jose, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. We have whole counties in California, like Modoc County, for instance, up there in the Northeast, where there's fewer than one person per square mile. And there's areas in Los Angeles where there's nearly 20,000 people per square mile. So we have huge disparities in population densities over short distances in California. And in a state where there's nearly 40 million people, almost 90% of those people live in urban or suburban areas on less than 10% of the land. And based on recent estimates that were published by David Nowak and Eric Greenfield from the USDA Forest Service, we have over 343 million trees in these urban and suburban areas in California, where we have all this population living. And so that number of trees, with the number of people living in urban areas, trees per person in California's urban areas is about 9.7 trees per person. And that's way below the world average, and we could do a lot better. And I assume that everyone on the call, everybody in the city, we're all working towards increasing this number of trees present in urban areas per people living in those urban areas. But there are significant barriers to that. People need trees in urban areas. We know that. A great deal of data has accumulated and has been published about the importance of trees in cities. Trees cool cities. The image in the upper right-hand corner shows heat islands in summer of 2017. The lower two are satellite thermal images of LA at night, showing warm areas with more hardscape. Having full canopy cover provides up to 10 degrees Celsius of cooling, and neighborhoods with relatively low vegetation or canopy or percent canopy cover are demonstrably warmer. Trees reduce energy consumption. A study comparing different residential areas in Illinois showed that trees reduce summer energy consumption by up to 25%. Urban trees promote wildlife. This figure shows the results of bird censusing in Seattle is correlated with tree density. In Seattle, at least, if you want birds, you need a minimum of 5 mature trees per acre. And that's true and it might be even more than that in Mediterranean climate areas. We even know now that even vacant lands, if treated properly, can be refuges for native wildlife. And this is a recent paper showing that. We know that trees can reduce crime. And researchers studied researchers in this paper, is an awesome paper. They studied police reports for the Ida B. Wells housing project over the 70 years that housing project existed. And they wanted to answer the question, does vegetation reduce crime? Because the populations in the different housing projects were very similar, but the vegetation wasn't, they could actually approach an answer to that question. And more people, what they found was that more people engaged in social activities when more plants were present. And people had fewer experiences of aggression and violence when plants were around, and the overall incidence of crime, and that's both property crime and violent crime, were lower in areas with more plants. And the awesome explanation that they gave for this towards the end of the paper was, quote, was that plants mitigate the psychological precursors to violence. And those of you who walk in parks and have houseplants and so on, you know what they mean. Plants mitigate the psychological precursors to negative feelings in general. And we know that about our trees in our cities. Finally, trees make people happy. And in the UK, in this paper, people surveyed a number of measurements of well-being and people's perception of well-being, and they all increased when there were more trees around. So all that accumulates to something that we all know, that urban life without trees is a lower quality of life. And this is in light of the disadvantaged communities and tree cover comparison that was published by CAL FIRE. In this map, the dark green areas with high tree cover, the dark green areas have high tree cover, and the tan areas have lower tree cover. And disadvantaged communities are outlined there in red. They have the fewest level of canopy cover. So when you see a map like this, you have to immediately wonder, like, how can we do better? And I think the answer is, and a lot of people on this call are working towards that. And the answer is, we can do better in many ways. But what I'm interested in talking about today is better tree selection early on in the process of planting trees. Our urban environments, they're designed ecosystems, and we choose what we plant there. And we can affect the quality of these ecosystems based on, and that's for humans and wildlife and everything that I talked about, based on the characteristics of the trees we plant in those areas. So what is successful tree planting in the 21st century in a time of climate chaos and biodiversity loss? Well, I'll define it as achieving human benefits. That's human health and the aesthetic values, well-being, all the quality of life stuff I referred to. Also, in the current day, we can't ignore atmospheric carbon sequestration. Climate change mitigation is an important aspect of successful tree planting. And the third thing is conservation of biodiversity. We can actually potentially conserve biodiversity by choosing the right species in our urban forests. And if we define successful tree planting as having a component of each of these, then what things need to converge to make this all possible? Obviously, if the trees we plant, it's the trees we plant and where we plant them. So species selection, and then the site conditions. The problem with site conditions, the problem with the small street tree well or all that is they're fixed. They're usually expensive to modify. So tree selection is where you have the most control for future success of that tree planting event. What tree you plant in that area. There's always the right tree for the right spot, and modifying the spot is difficult. Finding the right tree, if done properly early on, is a very important thing. Yet tree selection is difficult. It's difficult and it's often controversial. And one reason for that is that there is no perfect tree. People feel so strongly about trees, and like so much of our society now, that people are deeply divided about their opinions about everything, and everybody has an opinion, ill-informed or not, everybody has an opinion. People love and hate trees. LA is having a great bloom of jacarandas this year. Whole streets are covered with these vaulted purple ceilings of blooms. But while these trees bloom, people complain bitterly about having to clean up after them for 2 weeks out of the year. And you probably have an opinion about the jacaranda. You may love it, you may hate it, depends on if you live with them or not. And this is not true. This is true for a bunch of species, not just the jacaranda. Tree selection is difficult, and people often want a tree that, at least in my experience, they often want a tree that just doesn't behave like a tree. Here's a request, for instance, that I received for help with tree identification. Hi, Dr. Ritter. I would like to plant a tree in my front yard and want your help with tree selection. I would like a tree that blooms nicely, doesn't grow big, doesn't drop any leaves, flowers, or fruit. Thank you for your help. Now, the idea that trees are living beings, it often doesn't readily occur to everyone. And this is not an easy set of requirements to satisfy for this person. Perhaps one of these cell phone towers with plastic leaves and blooms glued on would be the best tree for this person's yard. I don't know. I've spent a career trying to help people identify trees and select trees for the right planting in the right place. One resource that I've poured a lot of energy into is Selectree, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. I want to mention that it's very important, I think, to actually know what species is being planted and know the characteristics associated with that species. And I'll give you an example of that. Tim discussed earlier a case study where where root pruning of the Indian laurel fig happened in that neighborhood in LA. And the Indian laurel fig sometimes goes by the Chinese banyan tree. The scientific name for it is Ficus microcarpa. It unfortunately has a number of synonyms that people also refer to it as Ficus nitida, sometimes nitida figs, Ficus retusa. It's all the same species, and it's all the same thing. These are very popular trees in downtown areas, in cities throughout Southern California. Los Angeles is no different, and Mediterranean places worldwide. Actually, this species has been planted there. Here it is, for instance, is a line in Beverly Hills. They can get to be massive, massive trees. They were introduced to Mexico before they were introduced into California. I'm standing next to one there in Oaxaca, in a square in Oaxaca. You can see it's become a really, really massive tree. They can also be just bonsai'd into small little things like the ones on the right there in San Francisco. That's on Union Street, San Francisco. They can be tortured into all kinds of different shapes. There's an espaliered one in Claremont. They germinate out of the bottoms of buildings sometimes. That's the photo I took there in the upper right in Santa Monica. And this is the same species consumed in a wall in Hong Kong, and on the right in a park in Hilo, Hawaii. In the wild, this tree is a strangler fig. It actually starts its life up in other trees, grows roots down over those trees, strangles that tree out, and then becomes a freestanding fig. And we've brought this thing into our urban forest, and it's incredibly popular. It's loved and hated, and they are survivors. And the reason why they're survivors is knowing the characteristics and what species it is makes a big difference. For instance, Ficus benjamina, the one individual tree on that event that Tim referred to, that is not a strangler fig. That thing, when you cut its roots, will have a huge problem that this one doesn't. The reason why the roots of these species can be almost completely removed and they can survive is because of their biology in the wild. And so my guess is that event of the removal of those roots, and Dr. Smiley will have his opinions about this as well, but I see this species getting hammered in California and recovering over and over and over again because of what it is, and maintaining stability and being cut right up to the trunk. And we have dealt with this because this is our main street tree in downtown San Luis Obispo, and we've cut them right up to the trunks and they've recovered, and it's a crazy species. But knowing the species is incredibly important for reasons like this. And Selectree is a tool, an online tool that we've created to try to help people with tree selection, tree identification. It's partly funded by CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service. We've spent many years developing it. And again, it's to help people with tree selection in both California. We've now expanded it to Hawaii, and it's being used way beyond that. We have over 1,500 species now in the service. 75 characteristics for each of those species with about 9,000 photos. It's become one of the most visited tree websites in the world. We're averaging about 50,000 independent hits a month for it. And it's the best site, I think, for high quality, accurately labeled tree photos. And that's what people mostly come to the site for. And there are many considerations that go into selecting trees early on in a planting process. And I want to talk about some of them and some of the ones that I think are important now. The physical tree characteristics included in our database are things like that you would expect. They're things like tree height, canopy widths, shape, foliage, reproductive characters. What are the flower colors? Do they flower or not? Are they evergreen or deciduous? But we also have other characteristics like climate zones, interaction with soil, potential issues or concerns, common uses in the landscape, pest and disease issues. And we're trying constantly, it's a living document, so we're trying constantly to incorporate as much data as we can from different studies that come out. And Dr. Smiley mentioned the work of Nelda Matheny and Jim Clark about root pruning, and we have tried to incorporate some of that into select tree and species. We have a list of different species that are impacted in different ways by root pruning based on the research that we can find. We can use some of these characteristics actually to help us select better trees for the future. I worked with Greg McPherson on the selection of the species and the study that Miranda talked about with looking for future trees for future climate change scenarios. And other examples are things like salt salinity tolerance, disease tolerance, drought, in the climate zones that things are occurring in. And now we're trying to model different species based on their native range for their climate adaptability for the future. So ultimate tree size is an important consideration when selecting trees, and it's one of the things that people use the most on select tree. What's the height? Basically, height being a proxy for overall tree size. And we know that the urban forest can play a role in carbon sequestration. The urban forest actually has to continue to play a role in carbon sequestration, but large trees are necessary for that to happen. This is another David Nowak figure showing an obvious thing that older trees sequester more carbon. My research group has recently developed a collaboration with all the large privately owned inventory companies in California on a CAL FIRE supported grant. These inventory companies, Davey Tree is one of them, who was mentioned earlier by Greg. These inventory companies are sharing their data with us so we can answer some important questions about the health of the California urban forest. And we have now over 6 million data inventory points from all these companies. I think it's the most comprehensive data set that exists now for urban trees in California. And we've looked closely at inventory data for all kinds of municipalities and private areas in Los Angeles County. And I'll share some of that data with you during this talk. One thing that I'll share with you right away is that if we look at the data for the size or diameter at breast height, or DBH, which Greg also mentioned earlier, for trees in Los Angeles County, we see that most of them are small. They're around 12 inches in diameter. So that's 4.5 feet off the ground, 12 inches in diameter or less than that. And we look at, when we look at this for the top 10 most planted trees in Los Angeles County, which I'll share with you in a bit, we see that mostly the common planted trees mature at a smaller size. Larger trees are less and less popular. Trees that mature to a larger size are less and less popular in the Los Angeles urban forest. Older and larger trees are needed in urban forests, and we should be planting, obviously, the biggest possible trees whenever we can, where it's appropriate for the site. We shouldn't have sites that can accommodate large trees in which we plant small trees in it. And this is a documented and an unfortunate shift towards there is a documented and unfortunate shift towards the planting of smaller trees in urban forests throughout the U.S. Small trees provide few of the benefits of large trees. The crepe myrtle there on the right is an example. Crepe myrtle, as it turns out, is the most widely and commonly planted tree in California. It provides color. It's a little splash of color, and some places where it gets cold in California, some fall color and so on. And I don't know if you love or hate the crepe myrtle, that's fine. But it's a small tree. And one use, as it turns out, with a chainsaw has a potential to offset all the carbon sequestration for the lifetime of that small tree. And this graph is showing the fact that the larger trees are much less common in urban forests in the US, which is expected, but they've also demonstrated here that in this paper that species that achieve large size at maturity are not as commonly planted as they used to be. We also need more, so we need more trees all the time. We need to plant large trees that are appropriate for the sites in which we have. And we should be careful about how long those trees are expected to live. And I'm referring here to longevity, which is one of the characters that we've worked hard to try to find any data for the longevity of trees that we plant in our urban forest. When people measure carbon sequestration of a tree over its lifetime, knowing the potential longevity of that tree is obviously very important. All other things being equal, we should be planting the longest lived trees as possible. It's just an investment to benefits analysis. You invest in planting the tree and watering it. You want to get benefits for it for many, many years. However, in urban forests, particularly in Southern California, we need to be realistically that we are potentially just managing for trees that will, on average, live to between 20 and 30 years. That's what we're mostly seeing. And there's this establishment phase in the early life of every tree. This is in the wild and also in the urban forest. That is the most precarious time in the life of that tree. Most trees die shortly after planting. And there's this urban legend with insufficient data to support it. We actually have the data now where we're going to try to answer some of this, but it's still relatively difficult to answer. This urban legend says on average, the age of a tree in the urban forest in Los Angeles is 7 years old. And that's because of infant mortality, that most trees that are planted, they don't make it to maturity. And trees that do mature, and this graph is a graph that shows basically that at planting, 100% of trees are alive or should be alive, but very quickly a lot of them die. And then you have this line that goes down to 0 trees remaining. And the trees that survive this establishment period can live for many years and provide all the benefits. This is why tree watering programs, particularly in dry Mediterranean climate areas of Southern California, is so important. Tree watering is as important as tree planting. Tree watering is as important as tree planting, and drought tolerance is an incredibly important character of trees. And I noticed on the poll earlier that drought tolerance didn't win. That's fine, shade won. And it's interesting on that poll, Rachel, I would say that those things are not mutually exclusive. I tried to hit several of them and there was just flipping between those. So you can actually have shade trees that are drought tolerant that don't conflict with our infrastructure. It's possible to have the right species for a lot of those things and potentially also be conserving some kind of biodiversity in the process, which is another important consideration, I think, with tree selection is how the trees we select in our urban forests can impact issues of biodiversity loss. There are lots of kinds of trees in the world. Here are 2 centers of biodiversity, which is in Northern Australia and Brazil. And there's hundreds and hundreds of species of trees in places like this. If we look at add up all the plant species known in the world, we get to about 300,000 known plant species. And if you ask the question, as they did in this paper, how many of those 300,000 species of plants actually grow into a tree? The answer is just over 60,000 species of trees exist in the world. And if you look at all the species that you can find in the urban forests that are grown in urban forests all over the world. And I've tried to do this and adding up species, and I have a database of lists of all the species that have ever been tried in any urban forest. You get to somewhere around 1,500 species used worldwide in urban forestry. And a graphical way of looking at that is here in blue are the total number of species of trees in the world, and here are the species that we grow in our urban forests throughout the world. And even if you believe this to be a gross underestimate, which I don't think it is, that's a lot of uncaptured diversity that's out there in the world. And I think we could do a lot better. We clearly don't have all the trees that we should be growing in the urban forest. We may not be growing the best species that satisfy all the things we want from a tree in an urban forest. And in fact, the diversity in the world's urban forests is in decline. And the diversity of the of species in the Southern California urban forest is in decline. It's not increasing, it's going down. And this is because of the choices we're making. In 2010, Carol Bornstein and Bob Mueller actually looked at this for the Southern California urban forest for the diversity, and they looked at city lists and they saw this troubling trend of declining diversity. There are only a few species and they're grown everywhere. On average, they found 188 species on California municipality tree surveys. And then they looked, what they found that there are only 49 species on average approved for future planting. So that's 26% of existing species are approved for future planting and on future planting lists. These lists that we make for planting, they get whittled down. Like I said earlier, there's no perfect tree, and everybody has an opinion about which tree, the tree that they like or dislike, and the lists get whittled down further and further and further. And approved planting lists should be long. They shouldn't be short. They should be long. And we can find appropriate trees for different spots and use our approved planting lists for those. We have to remember that our current species palette could be also inappropriate for the future. And I would ask people from Los Angeles, what sister cities are that are hotter and drier than Los Angeles are you looking for the species that they're planting? What about Adelaide, South Australia? Do we know what they're planting there and what's successful there? How about Phoenix? How about Santiago, Chile? Are we looking at those places to know what we should be planting? Because they've done it, they've seen it, and they are drier than we are, and they may be predicting our future. And so based on this evidence from the 6 million data points that I referred to earlier from these private tree companies and our collaboration with them, here are the most, I'll give you the 15 most commonly grown trees in Los Angeles County from 1 to 15. And there's the list from Lagerstroemia or crepe myrtle down to the Ficus microcarpa, the species I talked about earlier. Here is the list that of the trees you see everywhere in the Los Angeles urban forest. Some of them are loved, some of them are hated. I'll make the argument to you that all of them are loved and all of them are hated. In Los Angeles, there are over 600 species of trees present in the LA County urban forest. And that's outside if you remove botanical gardens and arboretum where there's a lot of one-off species. The city of Los Angeles itself, based on the data that we have, has 281 species of trees growing in it. And within the county, that's the 7th most diverse city after Long Beach, Claremont, Glendale, Santa Monica, Pomona, Beverly Hills have more diverse urban forests. 65% evergreen, 35% deciduous or partly deciduous. And these species on this list, they're planted and potentially overplanted everywhere. Nurseries are partly to blame for this. So are landscape architects and designers. So are city master plans. And how do we get diversity into the landscape in California? That is a question that we should be asking. How do we get more diversity in the urban forest in our cities? And is it possible that to help the biodiversity loss with urban forests? Is it possible that we could have a rating or a score, which we're working on at SelectTree, with rarity, and that the species that are rarer in their native range or rarely grown would go up in that diversity rating, and then we could plant them more often. A good example is the red flowering gum. This is an endangered species in the wild. It occurs in a really small native range in Southwest Australia, fully endangered in its native habitat, yet we grow it quite a bit in Southern California. And should that be prioritized? Is that a thing we should consider in tree selection? Another example is one of California's rarest oaks, the Engelmann oak. It's becoming more and more popular in urban plantings. It only occurs from along the foothills of Peninsular Range from Pasadena down into San Diego, and used to be much more abundant before development, and much more abundant than it is now. As shown here, there's a photo of a Engelmann oak woodland in 1927, which is now completely gone and completely under houses. So the genetic diversity of these two species, the red flowering gum and the Engelmann oak, are actually being conserved in the Southern California urban forest. And should we try to make these things more popular? The Engelmann oak occurred on the cover of Pacific Horticulture, and luckily and happily, it's becoming more and more popular in the urban forest. Finally, let's talk about the idea of provenance. This is the place of origin of a species of tree. This is something that is shown here on the pie chart, and I'd ask you, is this something that should be considered when selecting a tree for planting? Here, this is a rough analysis of the provenance of California's urban forests, and you can see a couple things. You can see that the trees we have in our urban forests in Southern California are from all over the world, and the trees native to California actually represent fewer than 10% of the makeup of the state's urban forest. You can see we have a lot of species from Australia, a lot of species from Asia. 6% of species grown widely in California's urban forests are California natives. Now, is this something we should consider? Are California natives a worthy cause when it comes to urban forests? And I want to address that, because this is becoming a more and more important issue, and a thing that people are talking about quite a bit. It's a popular idea now, from the Google supported re-oaking project in the Bay Area to Doug Tallamy's ideas about growing urban trees, urban forests with only native trees in them. There's a movement afoot to reinvigorate horticulture and arboriculture with native plants. And native plant and tree biodiversity is incredibly important. I need to say a disclaimer here that I was the vice president of the California Native Plant Society. My second book is called California Plants, all about native plants. I love California native plants, but I want to and I'll have that disclaimer here by saying that remnant native trees in urban forests should be protected for their biodiversity and their cultural value. But the point that local biodiversity is important, it gets confused with this idea that we should be using only native plants in our urban forestry and in our urban forest settings. Native trees are not the only answers for our cities. In many places, we've changed the planting environment so drastically in our cities that native trees often fail or they're not appropriate. But there's another and more interesting reason, I think, and that's that there are surprisingly few native trees in areas in California where our large cities are. In California, we have about 6,000 native species. The annual annual growth form makeup of our flora is very high. A third of all the species grow and die in a single year. Of those 6,000 species, only about 80 of them, you could make an argument that they grow as trees and always grow as trees. And about 40 of these are found somewhere relatively regularly in our urban forest based on surveys that myself and Bob Moeller and other people have done. And we have about 10 to 15 natives that are grown commonly, and I listed them right there throughout the California urban forest. Now, why aren't there more native species? Why aren't all 80 being grown very regularly in the California urban forest? Well, first of all, many of them are hard to grow. They often fail in cities because these riparian trees or high elevation trees. Good luck getting a bristlecone pine to grow in a urban setting in Los Angeles. But if we decided we were going to grow only native trees, a problem with this idea is that it would severely reduce the palette of diversity available to us. And if we look at, when we look at this, we see that there actually the 80 species of trees in California, they don't actually grow in the areas of population in California. We've mapped tree biodiversity by overlapping the native ranges of all California tree species. And what you can see is that California's population centers are areas where there are relatively few native tree species, on average about 10 or fewer. And most of them are just these remnant riparian areas. If you think about the rolling coastal hills of Mediterranean coastal California, it's coastal scrub and chaparral, and there hasn't actually been trees native there since the Miocene or something like that. And here's a picture of Los Angeles in the upper right-hand corner in 1868. That's Broadway in the middle of the photo. And remember that Los Angeles has a diverse urban forest with over 250 extant species of trees. However, the city of Los Angeles, take the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles, it has 7 native species. And only the 2 that I underlined there in red are not riparian trees. So that's that stand a chance of growing well without year-round water. So that's only 2 species. And it's likely that the coast live oak actually is what you're seeing in those old photos. And if you add, okay, so you take, let's say you want to expand that out and you take LA County and you add LA County, you pick up another 7 species at best. There are 4 more oaks in the Buckeye. Again, the non-riparian ones, there's 5 of them. So an urban forest made up of 7 native species is not a resilient urban forest. And so it's a good thing for us to be looking at other places in the world. What is growing there? Provenance is not as important as what is successful and what we can actually find that works well, that gives us all these things that we need: shade and less infrastructural problems and drought tolerance and success and so on. And so I'll say that I'll remind you that we have 200 trees per person in California, much, much less than that in the urban areas where everybody's living. We need to be planting trees all the time, more and more of them. And in areas where they don't exist, that's also important. And we need to have a broad and diverse plant palette to choose from. And if we're going to address the challenges of the future, it will require a diverse and a robust urban forest. And this is going to require quality tree selection, which is a very important and evolving skill that actually has biological consequences. And it also has philosophical and political considerations. And making a list of trees to plant is not a simple thing, and it will vary, and it's very difficult, and I don't envy that position, but it's a very important thing to be doing, and it's an important thing to get right. And it's always compromised as well by the fact that the best species, they may not be grown and they may not be available in nurseries. So that's an issue that we have as well. And so I've worked hard, and me and my colleagues have worked hard on Select Tree, and I hope this service can assist you in doing a quality job, determining which species should be planted into the landscape. We're always expanding and refining the service and adding new species and so on. So please use it, communicate with us. Talk to us about changes you think you want made. Let us give you advice. And I have a website where you can connect with me. I can make this talk that I just gave downloadable there. I write books about California plants, and I write climate change fiction as well. So again, connect with me. I'm honored to be invited. Thank you for that. And I will take questions.
Thank you so much. And you know, that is absolutely the truth. It's going to be a complex conversation that requires us engaging with nurseries to talk about growing different species of plants. And it's going to be about continue to talk with researchers like yourself around what trees are, what trees are going to be best for us moving forward. And within that, also looking at the infrastructure piece, how we find room for more large trees. That's one of the main things I've been talking to city staff with about since I started this position, is how do we find more space to plant trees that will be big in the long run. And that definitely is our challenge of how we balance development and tree planting. And it's very, very complex. So I really appreciate your providing that overview. I do want to, we've got some questions. I do want to acknowledge that we are just about at time, and I'm wondering if you'd be available. I do want to do a little bit of a closing piece, but if you're available to stay for a little bit after to do Q&A.
Fine with me. Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead if you want to mute yourself. So if you want to stay after, we will have some time for Q&A with Dr. Ritter. And he also had offered to help us write some responses if we don't have time to get to everybody today. But I do want to take a minute and allow for some celebrations for our other departments. Melinda's pulling up the slides for us. So obviously we've heard a lot about the work of Streets LA today. We've heard a lot about some of the topics that we're addressing as a city, but I want to share a little bit about what our other teams have been doing. And ideally, again, with the in-person summit, we would have allowed each of them to get up and talk for 10 minutes or so, and maybe had some posters up for us to share information on their project. But I'm happy to just share a brief overview. Within Recreation and Parks, they have been working on a CAL FIRE grant. Again, CAL FIRE's come up several times today, so you should all be aware how important the funding that CAL FIRE receives for urban and community forestry is for the city of Los Angeles. That grant that they received has been allowing them to move forward with doing their tree inventory, also being done on that same platform. So if you go to that laparks.treekeepersoftware.com for the tree keeper inventory, you'll be able to see park trees as well. So they're about 30% done with 36% done of the number of park sites, and about 27% of the acres, total park acres, have been inventoried to date, including the use of some multispectral camera drone flyovers to do parts of Elysian Park that were really hazardous for people to get down, and in those canyon areas and other spaces where it was too dangerous to go straight up to the tree, they looked at a pilot study of using drone imagery to do some of that component. I'm also happy to share that they have been planting trees as part of that CAL FIRE grant. They committed to CAL FIRE to plant 680 trees, and they've planted 695. And 85% of those were done by volunteers, which is so important. Any opportunity that our community members have to get their hands in the dirt and bring trees to their parks, I think it's so valuable. So next slide. I want to share a little bit about, Melinda, if we can get the next slide up.
It's up on my screen. It's for engineering.
Great, thank you. So we heard about the sidewalk repair program again from an urban forestry division perspective. And I will be sharing, they shared multiple slides with me with some really great images of trees that have been kept in place as part of the sidewalk repair program. They're looking at how we make sidewalks and ramps accessible for all Angelenos, and have been instructed by the Board of Public Works and by the city as a policy to try and preserve trees whenever possible. And so in the course of this project, they've taken care of and repaired 86 miles of sidewalk, 1,905 curb ramps at 1,550 sites. And over those sites, 4,200 trees have actually been able to stay in place, either with modifications to the site or other manners. We've been able to keep trees in place, and over 1,300 trees have been planted for those that were removed. Next slide. And the departments have, again, additional information available on their programs, on their department websites, and I also will share the slides that they shared with us. I want to acknowledge the LA Department of Water and Power. Their Energy Efficiency Solutions program funds the trees that we plant on an annual basis, about 20,000 trees planted, delivered, and distributed through city plants and their nonprofit partners. You can see their logos at the bottom, all of our wonderful nonprofit partners. And the trees provided through this program are now saving 6.3 gigawatt hours a year and avoiding and sequestering over 4,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. So that program has allowed us to continue planting, as was mentioned, is so important. Both Tim Tyson is always telling me we got to keep planting, Rachel, and we just heard from Dr. Matt Ritter that planting is so important. So we really appreciate that, particularly because we've been able to leverage those DWP funds to get additional trees through those CAL FIRE grants. A lot of the times we're able to say, look, state of California, we are utilizing some of our funding for trees. Can you help us get concrete cuts or water with your grant? So we are definitely trying to address the watering issue. Next slide. This is another great celebration. A lot of you, I think, are familiar with the wildlife pilot study being pulled together by the Department of City Planning. This is looking at the areas, just like Dr. Matterer mentioned, we need to be looking at areas where we have existing stands of trees and habitat, and looking at how we can develop in a thoughtful and sensitive manner. And so they've been working on a series of regulations to instruct new development. And the pilot area, the initial area that they're looking at, is that eastern section of the Santa Monica Mountains. And they're hoping to have some draft regulations, and not just looking at trees, we're looking at all parts of the ecosystem health in that area, which again is something I'm really thrilled that we have expertise in the city family to be looking at this issue beyond just trees, but looking at the entire space and how we can instruct new development to happen in a thoughtful manner. They're expecting draft regulations to be available by the end of summer, and I know some of you have even already participated in some of their feedback sessions. So next slide. And lastly, I want to acknowledge LA Sanitation and Environment. They have been grant writing machines. And so here you see a map and a list of the 4 CAL FIRE funded projects: the Vermont Corridor, Greater Greener LA, Shade LA, and Tremendous. They have a current application in called Root for the Future. They're really good at naming things in sanitation. And this is huge. We've been able to plant over 5,000 trees. They've been able to remove over I think it's 1.67 acres of concrete for new concrete cuts, over $4.75 million in state funds that have come to tree planting, watering, and concrete cuts. And again, huge thank you also to UFD. Streets LA has provided watering as match. And in addition to the LADWP match, we've been able to provide watering as match for some of those projects. And so again, we're looking at how we bring more tree resources to the city. Next slide. And so I kind of want to just pull together with one kind of final thought about our future and I think that this celebration in particular, I'm not showing it because it's a happy tree planting moment, but I think it represents why, and I know one of the questions was asked early on is how do we get to where we're, like Seattle or like the other tree cities that are maybe a step ahead of us in terms of some policy development. And it's through our collaboration. So on March 7th of this year, when we were at a point where people were feeling uncomfortable if we should be doing handshakes, can we still have the event just prior to the Safer at Home order, we were able to have an Arbor Day planting hosted at the Banning Museum in Wilmington. And it really it showed the spirit of collaboration from city departments to different agencies, to the community and our nonprofit partners and all the different resources. It was a beautiful resource fair coordinated by City Plants. We had DWP trees being distributed to homeowners to take home. We had park trees being planted with Recreation and Parks. And again, they were our fantastic hosts. There's nothing like tree planting at a park where there's bathrooms available and wonderful green space to congregate after a planting event. And then we planted street trees. And we had 236 new concrete cuts for tree wells that were provided through that LA Sanitation grant. And the trees planted on the main corridors around that section of Wilmington are being watered by Streets LA as part of the LA Sanitation grant. So you can see the total numbers there. Out of that 90,000 tree goal, we planted 659 trees that day towards the 90,000 tree goal with over 400 volunteers. And that's the key piece. It's going to take our city departments collaborating in such a beautiful way. It's going to take engagement from the public and our different constituents, and it's going to take our partner organizations to really continue to grow our future urban forest. And for me, urban forestry is about 3 components. It's about preserving existing trees that are healthy whenever possible. It's about maintaining the mature trees that we have, and it's about planting. And all 3 of those need investment over time for us to really achieve our goals. And a lot of the issues in those areas are complex. Again, finding space for big trees, allowing for development when we have issues with housing, but in a thoughtful way. All of these things have to be considered in order to allow our city to move forward and to grow that really robust and healthy urban forest. So with that, I do want to do one final poll. Thank you so much all for being here. And we really, again, this is the beginning of the conversation. I just feel the appetite for future conversation and really look forward to diving into some of these topics in different settings, whether it be online or if in the future we're able to meet in person. Let's go ahead and do the final poll question. I don't have the name right in front of me. Future meeting topics, that would make sense. So if you want to indicate, I think on this one, you can select a couple. I hear you, Dr. Ritter. There is more than one thing that you think about when tree selection. So here we have provided you the opportunity, I think, to do more than one choice.
And we're going to leave this poll up for just a bit longer than the other ones.
Wonderful. All right. Melinda, any other concluding things that I'm forgetting in my talking before we go back to Q&A with Dr. Ritter?
No, I just want to thank everyone who participated. We had somewhere around 175 unique people viewing our seminar today, and I think that is wonderful. So just appreciate everyone's forbearance with our technical issues when we were starting, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, and I found in my notes what I also wanted to highlight. The really great thing about that Arbor Day event was it not only was it all that collaboration, but we were doing it in a community that is historically had low canopy cover. And we haven't talked about equity a lot today, but and I didn't acknowledge this when I was showing the LA sanitation map, but a lot of our tree planting activities and other components are really focused on how do we increase canopy in these high need areas? How do we utilize the resources available to us to do that, as well as preserving trees all over the city? So just want to add in that note. Streets LA team, I've been talking. Do we have some key questions that we want to pull up? Oh, and I see we've got our poll results. Love it. I'm actively working on the protected tree ordinance component, so I'll be happy to engage with all of you more on that topic. And it's really great to see the other areas where you're interested in participating in the conversation. So do we have some questions for Dr. Ritter?
Rachel, I could just address one that I read here. You want me to do that?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, this one says the introduction of new species in parks and open spaces is a tricky thing as they become invasive and further destabilize our diminishing local native plant communities, which are, to our knowledge, the most sustainable. And I agree with a portion of that statement. Some of it is not true at all, actually, though. And we've looked over and over again for where we can find tree weeds in California. Tree weeds in California are usually in riparian areas. And I just did a big survey of San Diego County, for instance, with John Redmond, in which we looked at tree weeds. And the issue is that in a dry Mediterranean climate, wood, first of all, it takes water to make trees, and so we have serious issues with invasive plants in California. And I work with the Invasive Plant Council all the time on this, but our serious issues are not with trees. Our issues are with usually annual plants, grasses, asters, things like yellow star thistle. Tree weeds in California are minimal, and the idea that we're going to introduce trees from other places, I mentioned Adelaide, Australia, or Chile, and they're going to be spread out into our open areas and be weedy. It's not reflected by reality. That's not what we see. It's not happening. And so there are reasons to think that our native plants are things that we should be growing. And I believe that, I think so, but we can't ignore the palette of appropriate trees from around the world because we think that what we introduce is going to become weedy. It's not. It's just not. We can't find evidence for that. And so So we should be very careful about horticultural plants that are grasses and annual asters and things like that, and legumes, but not trees, not the big woody things that don't do well in dry climates. We just talked about the fact that they're hard to get established because you have to water them, and that's true of them not being able to overtake natural areas. Was my mic on? Did you hear that rant? You did.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
We can hear you. Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. We definitely heard that. Thank you, Dr. Ritter. It was a terrific presentation. Martin Schlageter here again. You know, you spoke about watering a couple of times, and there was a lot of, spirited questions here on the Q&A about watering. And I'm wondering if you had a perspective about what that establishment period is. Are we talking about watering for a short period during that establishment period? Are you talking about a longer period which would require, ongoing irrigation and maintenance? And do you have some opinions on that?
Yeah, I have opinions about that, and it's a great question. And I noticed some spirited comments about this. If trees are involved, the comments tend to be spirited, so it's not abnormal. The thing that I would say, Martin, is that the establishment period depends on the species. And in general, when we were talking about establishing a young planted tree, when you put a 15-gallon tree into the ground, as small as even a 5-gallon tree, you're talking about 3 to 5 years of watering to get it established in most places in Southern California. Now, it's different for different species. And I mentioned that watering is as important as planting because of the infant mortality that we see over and over. I sat on the board of California Relief, and we gave out money for tree planting. And people planted a ton of trees, and then a ton of trees died. And we had spirited discussions on that board about should we be giving out money for tree maintenance and watering, or should that be an important component of all those tree planting grants that happen is maintenance and watering, and how long should that maintenance and watering be? And again, it depends on the tree species, the location, and the amount of water that's available. And we are in San Luis Obispo, we're in our 10,000 trees campaign. We're going to plant 10,000 trees over the next 10 years in San Luis Obispo. And the major issue is going to be, how do we keep them alive after we plant them? Not how do we get the trees in the ground. Getting the trees in the ground, everybody can plant a bunch of trees and they feel great about it and they sing Kumbaya, and we go like, oh yeah, we planted a bunch of great trees. And then everybody walks away and those trees die if you're not careful. And so it's that time, the next 3 years of somebody driving around, which this is what we did. We're getting watering trucks and we're driving around and we're paying attention, getting as many people to adopt as many trees as possible and get some skin in the game with keeping those trees alive. So that's what we're working on. And it is a very important thing. The outreach to neighbors that are willing to drag their hose out and plant a tree is a really important thing.
And I'll just share, this is the research that Miranda mentioned earlier. This is part of what I was looking at and kind of has been my work is, one, people get sticker shock when they see how much it costs to establish a tree, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's really expensive, but it is expensive. Make sure that trees get regular water. And I really commend the approval of the additional watering crews that was added to Urban Forestry Division several years ago, as well as the funding that the different nonprofits and LA Sanitation has done to procure funding for ongoing maintenance. But what I was saying about the research, I've been looking at what is the right balance in terms of, again, health and community involvement. And obviously, if we can get people to water the tree, that is the frequent activity that takes so much. You have to have that proper, get that new habit, feed them on a regular basis, or else you end up with a less than healthy tree. And so that's one of the questions I've been considering in an ongoing fashion in my professional experience with urban forestry, and one that we're going to continue to address. And I think that really points to where we are now when it comes to tree species lists, when it comes to sidewalk repair, when it comes to our policies for hillside areas and other things. We're in the middle of the conversation. We're really going, Do we have all the research available to us? Is there additional research that we need to ask the LA Urban Center to help us with? How do we make sure that we have all the components we need to make really thoughtful decisions for our city policy moving forward, while not putting on the brakes? I mean, we're still moving along with tree planting and maintenance in the meantime, while trying to, as quickly as possible, get that data we need. And so we're really excited for the ongoing research opportunity we'll have with the research you're doing with the data points in urban centers in LA and the state, to kind of look at what you were sharing some briefly prior to the presentation, all that information that we can get from that data, the inventory data, our LiDAR data. I'm so excited for the potential for some really interesting conversations around the future of our urban forest related to that. With that, I think we're gonna call it a day. I know we're over time, and I appreciate those of you who have hung out with us to talk with trees a little bit longer. I could talk about this all day. I love talking trees with all of you. But we are committed to sending out answers to the questions we haven't addressed during this time, and look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thanks so much. And thank you, Dr. Ritter, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you all.